Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the August 30th, 2017 Planning Board meeting. We'll now bring the meeting to order. We're going to start with a silent moment of prayer, followed by the oath of allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided indicating the time and place of the meeting in accordance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975 by advertising a notice in the Star Gazette and Express Times and by posting a copy on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Let's do a roll call.
Members Correa?
Yep.
Simmons?
Here.
Pryor?
Here.
Schneider? Wolf?
Here.
Mayor McKay?
Here.
Vice Chairman Chesky? Chairman Johnson?
Here.
Officer Fishback, alternate Prince.
Okay, we're going to change the order around a little bit. We have an executive session coming on. We'll save that to the end. So we'll get right into the old business with the applicant in here. I just want to do one quick little record keeping. We have a resolution. Tony, do we want to get this in tonight?
We can do that later.
You want to do it?
This is the resolution granting this applicant's request to amend the general development plan. So,
You want to do it later?
yeah, we can do it later.
Okay. Before we start, do we know if there's any planning board members that are here that were not at the last meeting that need to sign the, I don't think there is, but there's a form you sign that says you watched the video. We don't have that case tonight, right?
Yeah, everybody that's here tonight is here at the last meeting.
Okay, great.
If I could, Tony, for a matter of clarification, they don't necessarily have to sign that before the next meeting. They have to sign it before they can vote. Is that true?
That's true.
Yeah, so if it didn't come to a vote tonight, those folks still have time.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're going to continue on. The next item of business is continue on with the hearing for I-78 Commerce Park, and our applicant is here, so you can come on up.
Good evening, Chairman, board members. As you were, Carl Kem, attorney on behalf of the applicant. We were here an even week ago, as Mr. Spessar indicated, for the general development plan amendment. We did talk about some broader site issues. Tonight, we will be focusing on the subdivision and site plan applications. We have also taken into consideration some of the comments and have made a change to the plan that I think the board will be happy with, namely the sidewalks that had been discussed and urged by Mr. Ritter and also I think one of the members of the public. So we have, and Mr. McGrath will go through the detail on how they were installed in the location. We've also had some conversations with Mr. Sturbins. We appreciate, as always, your access to your professionals on some of the outstanding items in his checklist. And we have also, as the board has a stack of paper in front of it, we had resubmitted all the traffic reports to make sure we comply with the requirement of the redevelopment plan and also comply with Mr. Sturbin's most recent review letter of August 18. We had also submitted, and it's a letter that's addressed to both towns as well as the boards, the most recent review letter from New Jersey Department of Transportation on the application for the 22 interchange, the realigned Lock Street. That's all being handled as one. So we've submitted that as well in the letter from me at the beginning of the week. I think that's... Good evening, Vice Chairman.
Question on the traffic study.
Certainly.
Just, no, Kim, this is exactly the same traffic study that was submitted in February of this year, or were there changes?
So we had previously submitted and was resubmitted, I don't have it in front of me, but
There was one in February that went to DOT, right?
Yeah.
Is this the same one?
So yes, we had submitted a traffic study dated October 15, 2015. That was submitted as part of the original general development plan application and hearing before this board. When item number 2 in my letter was a DOT traffic impact study dated February with no date, 2017. That was previously provided provided to the township and the board. Yeah, I don't think we provided, I think in the June meeting, we had provided copies to the entire board. So those two items you have seen before. Item 3 in my letter is against August 28th of 2017, is a letter from McDonough and Ray, just kind of analyzing some of the points in the letter to highlight some of the issues that are required in the redevelopment plan. And then item 4 is, like I indicated, the August 10, 2017 DOT review letter. That had not been seen by the board. We had provided that by email only to Mr. Sturbins and I believe Mr. Spasaro as well, but we formally submitted an appropriate number of copies to the board to make the record complete on that. And I hope that answers your question.
I do have that DOT letter you just mentioned. Can somebody point me to that, or?
It should be item 4 in...
I don't know if I've seen it either. It's dated August 10th?
Yeah, in my letter that was dated August 28th, it's attachment number 4.
I don't have that.
It's this big.
Can you give us a minute? There's a big file here.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, it should be about this big with a binder clip on it. And it has, you got it.
Ensure you have it, if not before.
Just in case you didn't have enough to read.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, tab 4.
Carlos, what will we do without you? Thank you. Look at number 4 there. If you think, take that look at number 4.
That's real quick. You got Peter coming in at 7:10, and he did not miss any testimony.
Just,
Just
the opening remarks.
the opening remarks.
He can listen to the tape, if you don't really go, listen to the tape for a few minutes, if you wanted to see what he might have missed that.
To the extent I have anything to say about it, it's really for the board and the board attorney to determine. I don't think the vice chairman missed anything. I said hello, I said what we did before, and we just were going through what has been submitted. We also indicated we'll show in the plans that we added the sidewalk in as requested by Mr. Ritter, and I think that was kind of the sum and substance of what we had presented before the vice chairman. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
No problem.
Appreciate it.
No.
My apologies.
No need to apologize. We all have lives outside of planning board hearings. So unless there's any other preliminary questions or issues, or if you need a little longer to review anything, we'll just pull Mr. McGrath up and jump in.
If you can give us 1 minute to hunt down that DOT letter.
Here, talk about that. It's right in front of each phone.
So that's at the end. Item 4, okay. Thank you.
It starts right there, it should have, I asked my assistant to make sure there was tabs on them, so if you look on the right side, there should be numbered tabs in this large volume, and that's the most recent DOT letter of August 10th I was referencing. And there's a reduced set of plans behind it that might help find it.
Thank you. Comments are on page 6 of the DOT letter regarding the traffic study.
Thanks, sir.
proceed with your witness?
Oh, yes,
Everybody, yes, is everybody,
The chairman asked for just a minute for people to look at the DOT letter, so I wanted to give folks time.
everybody's ready to move on? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Continue.
Certainly. So at this point, I would ask we call our project engineer, Mr. Thomas McGrath. He was sworn in last time. Do we need to swear him in again?
Not necessary.
Okay, Mr. McGrath, you understand you're still on the road, sir?
Yes, sir.
Your license is still in effect?
Yes, it will.
Okay. That's good news. So why don't I let you go through, because we didn't really get into the site plan testimony, why don't you go through the site plan issues briefly and address... Sorry, we did it, I apologize. Why don't you address the sidewalk change and anything else that's different from the last time we were here?
In last week's meeting, there was some conversation about placing a sidewalk through the project. We heard the comments from the board members and your professionals. We reviewed the plans, and the panel that is in front of me right now, I think I'm going to have to label it. I think we're up to A2. It's part of the overall site plan set, but I've added this particular panel. The sidewalk has been added to it.
What sheet is it of the set?
Sheet 431, but the plan set that's in front of you doesn't have the sidewalk on it. We've added it to this plan, and I've highlighted its location on this panel. If you want, I can date it, today's date.
Please.
And I've also marked it A2, I think we're up to,
Yeah.
as far as it goes. Okay. A2 is a copy, a print of the overall site plan that was originally submitted, sheet 431, and on it we have indicated where the sidewalk locations are, and I've indicated in blue above the title that the panel is for use to indicate the location of the sidewalk. What we've done is we've connected to the crosswalks that were proposed as part of the DOT intersection on 22. We've brought sidewalk up through our project out to Roseberry. We put it on, I'll call it the outboard side of the project. Between the roadway network and the sidewalk, we're going to have a guide rail, the tree row, the sidewalk, the fence, and then where we run into the retaining wall would be the next feature. So the sidewalk is the furthest we could put it away from the travel path through the site. That's the connector road sidewalk. Also on the minor connector roads, or the minor roads through the site, on this panel we show that on the driveway that heads towards building 24, which is this building right here in the middle, we brought the sidewalk up that roadway between the two buildings. I think they are buildings 1 and 4 in Phillipsburg. So we put them up along the side of the driveway there, around the curve, and then showing that it connects to the 3rd Street Bridge intersection. So that would be the layout of the sidewalk that we're proposing. What I also have with me tonight is a typical cross-section of what the sidewalk and roadway cross-section would be, to give you a flavor as to how far out the sidewalk is going to be from the roadway. I believe this is labeled as A3.
A3.
It's dated, today's date at the bottom, 8/30/17. And basically there's 2 cross-sections on the roadway, on this panel. One being the secondary roadway, which is the connector, the road that runs from the connector road out to 3rd Street. And you'll notice right in this area here is where we're showing the sidewalk. Right? The sidewalk is intended to be 4 feet off the face of curb, and it's a 4-foot wide concrete sidewalk. The second cross-section shows the connector road, typical road section, and there's basically on the right-hand side of the picture that we're looking at, there's two details that we are showing here. One would be the sidewalk location, where there is no retaining wall, and the second portion of it would be the sidewalk location to where a retaining wall would fall. The sidewalk in all instances would be 9 foot from the face of curb on that particular side, and the reasoning for the extra depth is because we're putting a guide rail along that perimeter of the curb. The tree plantings are there also, so we moved it back to give us a little more space to put the tree plantings, the guide rail, and the sidewalk would be then on the outboard side on both cross sections.
Mr. McGrath, maybe the board certainly appreciates what the applicant has done here. These are the only copies, and Beth will have to hold on to these as exhibits. Can you get us smaller versions, or at least professionals going forward, so that we have something for our files?
The idea behind this was to present it tonight so that you could see it. Our next revision to the plans would incorporate these details into the plans, showing the sidewalk location and these details, so that you would have a better understanding.
Thank you.
If need be, in the interim, I can have these duplicated.
Can I ask a question on the sidewalks, sir?
Yes.
I do appreciate the offer to put them in. I think they make everything work better. If I recall, under ADA, you have to give opportunities for 2 wheelchairs to cross. I think it's at 300-foot intervals. Most residential developments achieve that through the driveways, assuming the driveways meet all the geometric standards and slope and so on. And I'm relying on my memory here, but I bring that up as an issue.
What we're proposing is crosswalks on when these particular site plans are developed, and we know the actual driveway crossing. In this instance, I'm pointing to the Lopatcong building, number 7. We are proposing to put a crosswalk through the guide rail opening. We wouldn't want to introduce openings through the guide rail as we're going along to areas where there would be no receiving side on the other side of the roadway. We're only proposing...
I'm not talking about crosswalks. I'm talking about a 4-foot sidewalk. Should be 500, it should be 5 feet at periodic intervals to allow 2 wheelchairs to pass.
Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
And I didn't express it well.
What we will be, all the sidewalks will be constructed and be ADA compliant, and they do, you are correct, they do require like a passing zone,
right,
or a safe zone for you, and those will be incorporated into the sidewalk.
Great. I have a question. So on the upper cross section, there's a tree on that one as well, right?
That's correct.
It's a little far away for me to see, but okay. And that one is 4 feet away? That sidewalk is 4 feet away, and the one on the bottom is 9 feet away? Is that
is correct.
Okay.
The 4-foot sidewalk is intended only to the 4-foot location of the sidewalk is only in the area of this connection between the connector road and the 3rd Street Bridge. We don't have the drop-off, we don't have the guide rail installed along here because it's a minor road. We're not looking to protect traffic along here with the guide rail. So that's why the introduction of the guide rail in the lower cross-section pushes the sidewalk further away.
The only difference is the guide rail in the upper, and that pushes it an additional 5 feet?
Well, between the placement of the guide rail and the placement of the tree and then the placement of the sidewalk, it made the spacing that much bigger.
And the sidewalk that goes up to Route 22 on the top, this area right here?
Yep.
Yeah. What does that go to? Is it like a dead end where it hits Route 22, or does it continue on to another sidewalk system?
Our understanding from what we heard last week was to connect to the Route 22 proposed intersection. On the proposed intersection plans, DOT requires you to put in crosswalks and ADA ramps and the like. We are proposing to connect our sidewalk to that terminus point. We're not proposing to
Okay.
put sidewalks
So
anywhere else.
there is an actual crosswalk there.
Well, as part of what we're proposing, there is a sidewalk, or a crosswalk to get you to the other side
Of
of
22.
22.
Okay.
But I don't believe there's a sidewalk on the other side of 22.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McGrath, will the applicant continue to have responsibility for snow clearing and maintenance of the sidewalk?
Yes, it would be the same as the roadway, and
Just wanted to confirm that. I thought that, I already wrote it down, but I wanted to confirm it. And how do you propose dealing with bicyclists? Are you going to encourage or discourage their use of the sidewalk? Sort of a double-edged sword. You don't want them running over pedestrians, but we don't want to see them in the road either.
that's
So,
correct.
What's your proposal?
Our proposal is that it's intended to be a sidewalk. That was our direction from last week, that we put that in as a sidewalk. A 4-foot wide sidewalk doesn't really accommodate pedestrian and bicycle. It was intended to be strictly for pedestrians.
Will there be any signage to discourage or prohibit bicyclists from using the sidewalk?
I mean, obviously, we could do that. We could add that to
I'm
the...
just throwing it out as an idea. I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other, but it's up to the board to decide.
What would that entail, just a sign?
It would be posted.
Well, we could, if I may comment on that, Mr. Chairman, we could also post signs on the roadways indicating that sharing the roadway is permissible if the board is inclined to encourage bicycle traffic in this facility.
Well, can I ask a question there? My understanding, bicycles are permitted except on roads where they're prohibited. Are bicycles permitted on Route 22? Because
No,
if
they're not.
they're not,
They're not permitted on main service highways or on interstates.
and we don't really, I agree with Mr. McGrath, a 4-foot sidewalk is not designed to be shared by pedestrians and bicycles. So that leaves bicycles out in the cold here, correct?
Unless they're used for internal purposes and only to cross Route 22, but not to travel on Route 22.
About skateboards.
I have,
I have the scars.
I see some kids seeing the slope.
interestingly, I have learned, I didn't know, but that was a shortcut which has actually been used by many people who are riding bicycles through that old Ingersoll Rand property to get towards Frenchtown, which seems to be the area here where people drive bicycle along the Delaware River, Milford, Frenchtown, and that has always been a popular shortcut from Lopatcong to go towards Milford, so I'm not sure.
For the Ingersoll Rand property?
Yeah, the current one, they have always taken, what's that, Third Street? And then came out in Alpha, and then from Alpha they would travel to wherever they would go, and that was pretty popular for bike riders. I'm not sure that we will be able to stop that, but...
I mean, we are proposing this as a private road with public access.
Okay.
And I'm assuming that we could restrict the bicycle access to the facility if we want. It wouldn't really be something that I would encourage through here.
Okay. And my original question was, I know you guys want to save some money probably, but why did you leave out the streets between the buildings?
In here?
Yes.
It wasn't a connection point. In other words, if they weren't to go from, if the path was from 22 down to Roseberry, it would be the connector road. If the path was from 22 to 3rd Street, then it would be through the connector road between these two buildings now to 3rd Street.
I think Joe made that comment, and I'm not sure if I remember properly, but one of the reasons for the sidewalk was for workers being able to leave the building, and if they want to go for a walk, and that was you, Joe, right?
Yeah, I asked that question. About internal pedestrian traffic.
If these guys want to work in between those buildings, or at the building on the lower left, there is no way for them to...
Well, what we're looking at tonight is the connector road as it goes through the site and out to 3rd Street.
Okay.
Okay? When these individual site plans come in for approval, whether it be the Lopatcong site plan, Building 7, or the other buildings, the individual tenants may want the sidewalks to be continued through to make connections back and forth, and those could be accommodated at that time. The application here is really for the connector road.
Thanks.
So I'm going to have actually I have two comments. I think if we don't do anything, I think the New Jersey DOT way of looking at a bicycle is a bicycle is a recognized mode of transportation, legal to follow all the rules and regulations of the road itself. So if we don't sign this at all, bikers are expected to stay on the road, not the sidewalk. That would be how the DOT would perceive a road. But that was more of a comment, maybe it's something to think about. The 3rd Street, I'm kind of curious about. The sidewalk goes to 3rd Street and ends. Is there something on the other side of 3rd Street? I just can't remember. Yes, there is? There's a sidewalk?
There is a sidewalk as you come across 3rd Street, and it continues down across some of the properties. I'm not sure what happens when it gets past 2nd Street. There is a sidewalk that goes from 3rd Street to 2nd Street. There's a piece of the sidewalk as you head towards 4th Street. Then there's a very wide driveway that goes to that property. So there's no sidewalk, you're able to walk there, but there's no physical sidewalk, concrete path. And then I think it picks up again as you get closer to the diner.
Okay, thank you.
Mary?
Yes, go ahead. Absolutely.
Now, we're addressing all these sidewalk issues and stuff. The only concern we have as a board is what's in Lopatcong Township. That's just the one on the proposed 22 side, and we only have a couple 100 feet on the 3rd Street side are actually in Lopatcong Township. The rest falls under Phillipsburg's jurisdiction.
True. Right, so that would...
You're correct.
I did neglect to mention also that there is a connection on Lock Street down to the rec facility.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, that would be this area right here.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Now, I didn't see it from here. I saw the loop going out on the 22, but going down to the proposed education center.
Correct.
Tom, can we just explain which of the road sections would be the Lock Street roads?
That would be the secondary roadway would be the one that goes down towards Lock Street, that kind of configuration.
So yeah, I think you're right. We're only really concerned about what's in Lopatcong, but this gives us the overall picture of the site plan, just as showing the other buildings on the site plan. That's not our property, but it's still good to see how it all ties together. So
I just didn't think it would be appropriate for me just to stop the blue line.
Yeah,
Well, people say we don't want it. You go ahead.
So if Phillipsburg says they don't want it, then it kind of ends, right? Is that how it works?
Well, if it got approved that way, we could amend the site plan, but, if we want sidewalk in Lopat, I think we should say that, and P-Bird can decide what it wants.
Just to address that comment, Mr. Pryor, our intention was to present it to Phillipsburg with the sidewalks in it as described by Mr. McGrath. Picking up on the Vice Chairman's comment the other day was, it seems that for the average person, it makes sense that they're going to try and use the connector road as a connection point from Center and Roseberry up through to 22, Nature Center, things at that point. So it makes sense, and I'm sure that Mr. Ritter would have the same perspective from a planning point of view, that it should be connected. If it just starts in Lopatcong and ends at 22, it's
I
kind of a
assume
road
that.
to nowhere.
And,
It's our intention
To me, if you look at the area down in P-Bird, that's going to be used as a shortcut. That 22 is not pedestrian friendly as you go left. So people who want to go up to the mall or whatever, they're going to walk that way. They're going to want to walk that way.
Yeah, and I said that was the Vice Chairman's point, and that's why we put it for the entire line.
That's a better product. It clearly is. And probably also, from a liability standpoint, if people are not walking on the road, you guys are better off. Everybody's better off with that product.
Yeah, and again, we do appreciate the board's input and Mr. Ritter's comments on that. We took them under consideration, and I think it is, as you indicated, Mr. Olszewski, it's a better product. Yeah, and you're right, Mr. Grouse whispered to me. The other point, I don't know if it was you, Mr. Fesky, or other members of the board, is, hopefully you encourage users of the site to go across 3rd Street, and there's some businesses over there, frequent them for lunch or whatever they, can walk and get out and stretch their legs and hopefully frequent some of the local businesses. So it starts working together more, as the intent of the connector road was kind of a community benefit to both towns and the surrounding areas, and the sidewalks help connect those community benefits together. So I think those are the only changes we had that we wanted to highlight from our last time here.
There's just one other comment I wanted to make. We had indicated that we were going to try to make arrangements to meet with your professionals to discuss their letters, and we've set a date for that. I think it's the 9th, 6th, sorry, and we will be meeting Mr. Sturgeon's office to go through those comments to make sure we address everything to his satisfaction. I'm sorry, Mr. Ritter's also.
George, you'll be there, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So that was everything we had planned on presenting the board on the site plan and subdivision issues. Of course, we have other professionals in the design team here, so we'll certainly answer any questions you may have. I see Mr. Rashad is here. It's good to see you again, sir. And if there's questions on traffic issues or the recent submissions, Mr. Kennel is here to certainly respond to any questions the board may have or the public may have.
The way that the sidewalks tie into Route 22, I'm not trying to jump into the traffic issue, but now that it's going to be a crosswalk on 3rd Street, that's going to be taken into account into the phasing of the signal, so that it's pedestrian friendly. There's going to be a button to press or something so that they can cross.
Yeah, I can have Mr. Kennel get into more detail, but he's indicating, yes, there's going to be improvements to that intersection in general, aside from just the sidewalks. So I'll let him give the detail on that, because I'm not entirely familiar. Aside from that, there's going to be improvements. But yes, my understanding is the buttons for the crosswalks, appropriate striping, and ADA compliant curb cuts and things of that nature will be going in some or all that intersection. I'll leave that to Mr. Kennel. You want me to have him come up and give you the details?
When we want to go through any public comments on the site plan before we do that. But yeah, it's just,
we'll bring them up.
So if there isn't any more planning board member comments, we can open this up to public questions. Okay.
Carl, before the meeting started tonight, we had a brief conversation about the subdivision, and you indicated that you had held, repeat to the board.
Oh, certainly. So we, as the board may remember, the application tonight is for preliminary and final site plan for the connector road and the grading and temporary access, and then we had applied for only preliminary site plan and subdivision. I apologize. Thank you. Subdivision, because the exact location of where DOT is going to require their jurisdictional boundary, which may or may not create a fee simple line for subdivision purposes, but will create right-of-way lines, create issues for measuring setbacks and things of that nature. So that's one reason why it was requested as only as a preliminary, and we will be conferring with DOT on the letter, and that's one of the other things we'll be discussing with them. The other issue that I had overlooked that Mr. Sturbins and Mr. Spacell reminded me is exactly how Lock Street is going to be handled as far as new right-of-ways, older right-of-ways. Is it going to be dedicated to the town? When, how, and those level of details that the board and the professionals would greatly like to have resolved and put on a plan set and/or in a subdivision deed. So for those reasons, we didn't want to finalize the subdivision. We wanted to get a preliminary that helps with identification of blocks and lots for developers and things of that nature. But again, it would not be final. There would be no recorded deeds. There would be no indication on anything of dedication to the town and things of that nature until they're finally resolved and we come back in for final subdivision, meeting all your professionals' criteria.
And that is different what was last week when you were looking for preliminary and final, but now you're...
No, for site plan, we've always been asking for for subdivision, we've always been asking for preliminary because of the issues with, depicting where the right-of-way will end for 22 and DOT purposes, and as well as the Lock Street issues we were discussing. So we realized that those would not be completely finalized, and a final subdivision wouldn't be appropriate. But we submit, subject to the board's decision and input from your board professionals, that preliminary subdivision would be appropriate at this time.
Okay, well...
The other reason, too, is when we actually start, there's case law that talks about this, when we actually start the connector road, that kind of creates a division line, which almost, backdoor affects a subdivision without actually going for one. So we figured we should lay that out in the preliminary format as to where the road will be, how that will create at the very least everything to the west of the road and everything to the east of the road. So it was to start that process and conceptually start viewing the project as being split into pieces as opposed to a whole. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I was saying we'll probably want to talk more about the subdivision in a second. If we can, if we get right into the comments for the site plan and the sidewalk addition, then we can jump into the subdivision.
At your pleasure.
All right, great. So if there's no more current comments from board members, we'll open it up to the public on the site plan modifications. Any questions from what we just heard on the sidewalks? Yes?
Not only the sidewalks. I just want to ask a basic question. Is that DOT letter, the latest DOT letter, is that available to the public in any way, shape, or form eventually?
Certainly, it was submitted. It's a matter of the application.
And it's
part of the public record.
Thank you, Tony.
Just part of the gentleman's question, if Beth needs additional copies of that. I know I sent her a couple copies for the board, and I sent her a separate additional copy as her wearing her hat as town clerk, because DOT requires things to go to clerks. It's not just board members. So if you need additional copies, it's not easy to reproduce. Just give me a call, and I'll send them up to you.
Thank you.
Just have a quick question. Do I need to say my name?
Yes.
Maria Hedham, 700 Lock Street. I'm still concerned about, my piece of property and how the flow of traffic is going to change. Also, it is zoned business, it's commercial piece of property, and it's changing the accessibility to me, the visibility to me, and the traffic flow around me. I realize that this is a phenomenally huge project, and I'm just a little fish on the side, but it does change a lot in what happens regarding my piece of property as a potential spot to conduct business, even as a small farm. We do stuff around Christmas with Christmas trees, when we have other stuff going on there too. With a bigger plan in mind, I've only been there a few years. And it's an old place, as everyone who's been past it knows. It needs a lot of work and a lot of attention. And there's a lot to do. But my, question is, if this is a private road with public access, what does that do to my accessibility as a potential future business, being on a piece of property that's zoned for that?
Yes, you can
answer.
No, you stay right up here, because if you have other questions, I'm going to chase you away. What we had discussed last time, and we will certainly do it to the satisfaction of the board and the town, as well as the section from Lock Street of the connector road up to 22 would be in some fashion either a recorded deed or something that is always to be a public access road. So that we couldn't, or some future owner couldn't say, well, it's a semi-public road and I've decided it's going to be a private road, and meanwhile Lock Street, you can't get out of it, becomes a dead end. And we certainly never intended that. It's a very good point. So whatever mechanism we need to put in place to make sure that doesn't happen, it will. Lock Street, even the redesigned, will always be a public road. That was the intent. Again, we'll work with the town and the board to make sure whatever needs to be put in writing will be done so to protect your right to get access to your property.
Right. And including the connector road
The
section at the top
connector
there.
from Lock Street to 22 would be same type of language or whatever deed in the town would like to make sure that's solidified. We'll tighten that up.
It's really about the visibility for my property, the accessibility, and the safety. That's really my concerns there. I think that they're valid. So, thanks very much.
When we go through the traffic plan, you can come up again and we can get a little bit more fine-tuned on that.
Okay, I wasn't sure if now was, because you were talking about sidewalks, but I just wanted to put it out there.
And we're going to talk about the traffic and circulation coming up as well.
Okay.
So, thank you. No further comments from the public planning board members? Any additional comments on the site plan? Seeing none, we can move on to get back into your subdivision.
I don't think we need to talk about the subdivision, because last week, there was testimony by Mr. McGrath, who came up and he explained the same thing that Mr. Kim said tonight about why they didn't make the revisions in accordance with my June 26th letter. He did indicate that they would address comments 2.01 to 2.09 in my review letter. And Carl also indicated for the record that they would provide a zoning whereas George's letter having to do with subdivision. So I think we have that locked away. They've agreed to address those comments as a condition of approval.
So as far as the subdivision goes, the professionals don't have any comments in regards to giving them preliminary approval at this point?
I don't, since they've agreed to address all the comments.
Correct.
Okay. And that will be a separate approval aside from the site plan, is the
We
subdivision?
can vote on it separately.
Yes.
If you want to, you can open it to the public for any questions concerning the subdivision. Which would be, you can do so, but it would be subject to compliance with all of Paul's comments that he just identified, and recognizing that the lot lines and their locations may change depending upon final DOT approval.
All right, so just make sure there's no comments additionally by the board members. We didn't talk about it a lot last meeting, but I think, Paul, you said it pretty well. There's not a lot to talk about quite yet. You've got comments to address, and they're going to address them.
Would it be fair to say that you will not be coming back for final on the subdivision until you've finalized things with the DOT?
That's correct, and just to put a little more flesh on the bones, if DOT gives us an earlier definitive answer as to the lot line issue, but not the rest of the design issues, then we could come back to the board. At that point, we'd get something solid from DOT in that regard, regarding lot lines and jurisdictional lines and right-of-way lines, so that there's something, in writing, and something that the professionals can review. And just to go one step further, in addition to comments from Mr. Sturbins, is what we discussed last time, agreeing with the conditions of Paul's letter. And of course, Mr. Sturbins may issue another letter when we submit the final site plan, and we would subdivision. We'd have to address those comments at that point, because we're going to be adding things, and Mr. Sturbins may say, oh wait, we need detail on that, or it's not clear. So whatever's needed to satisfy the board and the professionals that final subdivision's appropriate, we'll address those in addition to what we just discussed last meeting.
I'd like to be clear, what's the date on that letter? Was it the June letter?
Yeah, the original comments on the subdivision were in my June 26, 2017 letter.
Okay.
Those comments carried forward and were also included in the August 18th letter verbatim. There had not been an addressment of them.
Correct. We'll make sure that they're taken care of, and those are accepted conditions of preliminary.
To the public, just to be sure nobody has any comments on that.
Absolutely. Regarding the subdivision, if there's anybody that wants to come up and take a closer look at the plan, ask any questions or comments that they have, we're going to be voting on the preliminary subdivision. So we open it up to the public to come take a look. Looks like we have no comments, so we'll close it to the public. Do we have a motion? What we were looking for, so it is preliminary subdivision approval, addressing the comments from our professionals. And you didn't have any objection to any of the comments, right? It was all of them that were... Okay.
As Mr. Sturbis indicated, we went through the entire letter at the last meeting, and there was, I think, 2.01 and 2.09
Yep.
that we will put on the revision to the preliminary plan, and then we will address all conditions that are needed to get final subdivision. Am I correct, Mr. Sturbis?
Correct. Okay. So I'll take a motion then. Carlos, you have a motion? Yeah. Okay.
I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. Beth, we can do roll call for preliminary.
Members Korea?
Yes.
Fitzsimmons?
Yes.
Pryor?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Mayor McKay?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Chesky?
Yes.
And Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you, Board Member.
Thank you. We can move on to your next topic on your, I believe it's the traffic and circulation plans.
Yes, as indicated before, we've had testimony. Last time we submitted the reports. I'll just have Mr. Kennel discuss in response to the board member's question, the upgrades that will happen at 3rd Street and 22 as the question was posed. So I want to make sure we don't leave that hanging. We give you the detail on that, and then we'll field questions at that point. Mr. Kennel? And Mr. Kennel's still on the road?
Yes.
Okay, so you're still on the road, Mr. Kennel?
I don't think I was sworn in.
Wait, this is under oath from, what, a year ago?
Oh, no, we were swearing.
Yes.
I thought you were
Just,
up,
I'm trying to get my dates straight. Maybe we should just do it.
Almost, but they held me back.
All right, please swear.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name for the record, spell your last name, please.
Yes, Scott Kennel, Kennel, with McDonough and Ray Associates, located at 1431 Lakewood Road, Manasquan.
And last time Mr. Kennel testified, he was qualified as an expert in traffic.
Yes, he was.
And the board will accept his qualifications?
Yes.
Thank you. Please continue.
All right, as far as the question as it relates to 3rd Street and Route 22, the improvements there will include an entirely new traffic signal system. The traffic signal system that's there today is outdated. One example of that is there's still signal equipment in the Jersey barrier. That's not part of their design standard today, so there will be a completely new traffic signal system installed at that location. It will include pedestrian push buttons, it will include pedestrian indications, as well as crosswalks, all complying to the ADA requirements. And I guess, well, it allows pedestrians to cross 22 as well as 3rd Street and the site access. So it'll be a fully accessible pedestrian intersection.
How will the lane configurations change from what we see there today?
It's going to be the same as it is today. Route 22 will be striped as 3 lanes on each approach, and 3rd Street will be a 2-lane approach as it is today.
With Chair's permission, can I?
Absolutely.
Last time I had a lot of questions about traffic, and, I mean, we reached the conclusion here that it was a private road discharging to a state highway, and we didn't have jurisdiction. I think 3rd Street is a little different. And DOT expressed a concern about queuing on 3rd Street. I probably, and I'm not testifying, I'm just saying I've probably driven 3rd Street every day for the past 33 or 43 years. And I'm concerned as well, particularly semi-trucks who come down and want to make a U-turn there. They pull into 2nd and make that little jug handle. And if nobody's there, the first thing they do is they take up the 2 lanes. If they don't have an opportunity to do that, and I've witnessed this where cars are in the left-hand turn lane, they shoot down that right lane and they make a left turn anyway, cutting off everybody, and you're not going to argue with a semi-truck.
Understood.
Now we're going to add trucks to that intersection. And I'm concerned about the impact there. That is probably the main way out of Morris Park. The next signal is down on Strikers. Most people don't take first because there's a jug handle on the other side.
Right.
People are making a U-turn. They're coming this way. So that is the main egress for Morris Park. We throw some trucks in there. I'm concerned about that. It's problematic now, sometimes. I see it being a bigger problem, and that's my question.
All right, well, as far as, again, obviously, the access scheme to this tract, the old Ingersoll Road tract, is going to be greatly improved from what it was previously because of the Lock Street intersection that allows us to capture the trucks to enter the site without having to go through the Route 57 interchange, without having to go to 3rd Street as they had to do previously.
Can I just pause there for a second?
Sure.
Again, I don't recall any real traffic counts on what trucks were back then. It was, we're working all with projections and so on, so it's kind of hypothetical, the number of trucks through there.
I didn't qualify number of trucks, but I was speaking with site managers who had past history, indicated that until the weight restriction was imposed, that they used the 3rd Street access. I guess that's pre-1990, if I remember correctly. I have to check my notes. And then they ended up using Roseberry. But there was a time that the 3rd Street intersection was used for trucks to access the site. And with this proposal, there will be a very minimal increase in trucks as a result of this site, and it would only be trucks that are originating on Route 57 from the east. Because again, the way this is being set up is that all trucks will utilize the Lock Street access.
But we still can't quantify that. You're talking about some hearsay, and I'm giving you my memory, and there's no figures to talk about the increase in trucks, correct?
I don't have data from back then, correct, as far as number of trucks, but what I can do...
But there's no data, huh?
Well, we have developed projections as far as the number of trucks that would be adding to that during the peak hours, and I've acknowledged the NJDOT comment, which we'll have to evaluate and review the timing scheme for that intersection if it means providing additional green time to Lock Street to better address the existing as well as future demands on that. That's will be addressed in our next submission to NJDOT.
There was an assumption, correct? There was an assumption to the percentages of the trucks going to 3rd Street, though.
Going to 3rd Street to access through Lock Street. I mean, over time it's been determined that truck traffic will be assigned to the Lock Street access, and that the access opposite 3rd Street is going to be used as a secondary access and use that for basically light trucks and passenger vehicles. So again, the intent here and the plan is to orient all the large trucks to Lock Street access. And we've designed that intersection to accommodate the turning movements of trucks in and out onto Route 22. Yes?
Will turns be allowed in all directions there? Do you propose to continue that?
Coming out of, yes.
Coming out of the project, you can make a right or a left. Coming
Correct.
out of 2nd Street, you can still make a right and left, because our police use that a lot.
Yes, that'll be full access, and again, it'll be, again, the type of vehicles utilizing it and the movements are similar to what existed before it was barricaded, I guess, approximately a year ago. So it'll be a similar type of operation.
Rather than drag this out, maybe I can just summarize. I share DOT's concern, and I'll wait to see how that's addressed.
Okay.
Perhaps
You mentioned traffic.
A good time to ask our traffic consultant who's here this evening if he's had an opportunity to consider these comments and what his position is and what guidance he might be able to give the board. Maurice?
I did, and if the board would like me to explain the DOT process a little bit more so you understand how the code works, I'll be more than happy to do so.
I want to know what makes sense. I don't necessarily, I'm not concerned with the
Well, what makes sense, I'm not
DOT
sure I can
process.
address that tonight, but I can tell you for sure that the traffic study that was submitted by McDonough and Ray did comply with the code, 100%, in terms of how they did the projections, how they accounted for the existing or the pre-existing land use and the future land use. So they followed what any other applicant needs to follow in compliance with the code, and I reviewed that. I also reviewed the DOT's response, the review letter, and I did notice, of course, the comment on the...
I am going to say one more time that the code does not, in general, codes don't necessarily have to be followed if it yields a senseless result. And I am still not on the same page
I wouldn't say
with everybody
results.
else.
That's not, I think the results are well-based, in this case, in how the study was done. Even though we don't have exact numbers of trucks that existed back in the 60s or the 70s, but the way we do it is we go to an ITE reference and we generate trucks, as you know, and we use that as the basis. The idea behind it, and the idea behind the code is that if there is a building that is in existence, anybody can occupy it without any approval. So the owner of the land gets credit for that threshold of traffic usage or traffic numbers. That's the logic behind the pre-existing credit.
Can I ask you a question, Maurice? Do you know what kind of businesses are going in these warehouses?
No, and I'm not sure the applicant knows.
If you don't know what kind of businesses go in these warehouses, how do you predict how much in and out traffic will there be? I mean, the first basis on basing how much traffic we're going to have is what's going to happen in these buildings.
That's a
And
very
if we don't know what's going to happen in these buildings, right, all your projections are pretty much guesses.
Well, that's not true. It's a very good question, though. The ITE, that stands for the Institute of Transportation Engineers, publishes large books, and they cover almost all of the land uses that are commonly used on the nation. For warehousing, they have Land Use 150, which is traditional warehouse, and Land Use 152, which is high cube warehouse. Land Use 150, the traditional warehouse, has been in use for decades. And the numbers that we use today are based on numerous studies. For example, one of them is based on 15 studies. So over the years, they went out and they surveyed similar facilities around the nation 15 times. And then they gave us the summary of all these numbers. So these numbers are real, and they're extracted from real warehouses that are in full operation and that have been surveyed in terms of trucks and cars. Now, recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, a new land use was introduced to the ITE Trip Generation Handbook, and that is number 152, which is for high cube warehousing. And that came about because the warehousing industry has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. In both ways, by the way. In one way, it changed in that it became very automated. To give you what I use as a rule of thumb to quantify in my own head warehousing, I would say that a traditional warehouse of 1 million square feet may employ about 500 people. A high cube warehouse of 1 million square feet will employ half of that. So that gives you an idea of the intensity of what's going on in these warehouses because of the automation. Now, of course, we have a new product now that is the fulfillment centers that are more intense. We need to deal with all these numbers, and the way the study was done was a mix of the high cube and the traditional warehousing, which would lead to higher traffic numbers. So in a way, you could look at it as being concerning. I hope I answered your question.
Now I'm going to be stubborn on this. Keep going, Doug. Back in the 70s, the 78 didn't go through Eden County. It didn't go into Pennsylvania. The site was heavily dependent on rail. Things were different. And we take a situation that hasn't existed in 3 generations, and we apply some modern numbers to it. The second question I have is I've gone through, I'm not a traffic engineer, I've gone through IT tables. I see the data that goes into them. There's a spread. It's manipulated, it's processed, it's reduced to a number. It may be over here, maybe over there. And if this method works, how did we wind up with that mess down in Robbinsville when everything opened?
Actually, I know a lot about the Robbinsville facility. I live a couple of miles away from it, by the way, so. When we project traffic volumes, and most of the time, these volumes are pretty close to reality, but not 100% of the time.
And on a new application, you don't have that many points to process. You don't have the surveys that you have on an office building. Everybody gets a cubicle so big, and you survey those, and you get a lot of data, and you come up with a value you have a lot of confidence in. You're talking about a new application here, you're talking about fewer points.
That's true. That's true. What I can give you, Mr. Bryan, my own experience in warehousing, I would say I've done about maybe 100 studies. So I've done a lot of them in central Jersey, northern Jersey, southern Jersey, in a lot of places. And I've noticed personally from experience that most of them, unless they are fulfillment centers, and unless they are special fulfillment centers, most of them don't generate a lot of trucks. And if you drive around warehousing facilities, you would think they're not in operation sometimes. You may stand in front of a facility for about 5 minutes and not see a single truck or car coming in or out. Having said that, if a tenant comes in here that, let's say Amazon, that's going to be a different story. I gave you some numbers before. I said a high cube warehouse that is 1 million square feet may employ 250, traditional warehouse 500, and Amazon of 1 million square feet would probably employ 1,000 people or more. So you've got...
But his approvals were for high cube, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's where we're working right now.
Well, in this case, there is a mix. So in this case, 1 million square feet is considered to be traditional, which is the higher number, and approximately 2.9 the high cube. That's how the application was submitted to the DOT.
Yeah, but how the application was submitted to this board and the approval, if I remember it, was as a high cube. Does anybody remember that?
I thought so as well.
It's in the resolution.
So since we don't really know, is it not prudent to always consider a worst-case scenario?
And in fairness to the applicant, I think that's exactly what they did. Because a traditional warehouse would generate more traffic. They took a more conservative route and submitted numbers to the DOT, so that if for some reason high cube with our approval was to change in some part to general warehouse use, they've been able to satisfy the DOT that change would not warrant any further modifications to what the DOT may ultimately want them to do. Just because they submitted to the DOT on that basis doesn't give them the right to end run the limitations in our resolution.
No, worst-case scenario here is fulfillment center, right?
Yes.
I guess I'm not going to belabor this, but...
Not any fulfillment center, by the way. A lot of them are just like any other warehouse. Few bring at least one name I know that is very intense. But the rest of them are very close to a traditional warehouse operation.
Let me ask this, and I'll yield to everybody else. We have a 950,000 square foot warehouse proposed. How many bays are going to be there? Close to 100?
I don't know offhand, but...
I mean, it's a typical number for something that size?
Probably more than 100.
More than 100?
Yeah.
And how many truck trips are we projecting?
I'll have to take a look at the stuff.
I recognize you're not the applicant, but you've looked at this, and I'm asking of our consultant.
Mr. Kennel has it in his August 24th letter to the board.
And Mr. Kennel, if you get the information before I...
Well, and again, that represented the whole development, but if you're looking at because it's building number 7, which represents approximately 25%, 24-hour truck volume would be 400 trucks on a 24-hour basis, trips, from that particular building.
So, I mean, I'm just doing a rough arithmetic here, but if you did that divided by 100 bays, it's 4 trips per bay, so that's a truck in, truck out, truck in, truck out, over a 24-hour period?
Well, the 400 trucks is a total inbound and outbound, so it would really...
For the whole site?
Well, no, for that one building, so that would equate to 200 trucks. You said a truck would come in, and truck would
The same truck would leave?
But so that's... So
2 trips, 100 trucks.
So that gets you 200 trucks a day.
Yeah, so as I said, over the 24 hours, we're projecting a truck in, truck out, truck in, truck out.
They're looking at 800 trucks. If the...
No,
For Peaburg and Lopatcong.
800 trucks a day.
Correct.
That's 4 and 4 out.
One of the things that I was looking through, is because this has been going on for a while, back in February of 2016, I don't know if this comment was ever addressed, but we had a memo, or it was a letter from Paul, or from Mazer, that the ITE should actually be producing a peak hour trip of 700 and 7,000 daily trips, but I don't believe those are the numbers that are in your traffic study. So I'm just wondering, was that comment ever resolved? It was the February 17th, 2016.
I think there was a misinterpretation on the review of that data, because I can pull that report, but we had provided...
Your report does indicate 8,400
per day, as far as passenger vehicles and trucks, correct.
The new report has 8,400.
Correct.
There's some differences between what we saw in 2016 and what we're seeing now. The 2016 report was based on 4.2 million square feet approximately of high-cube warehouse. The current report is based on 3.8 million square feet of warehouse space approximately, that has some conventional warehouse in addition to high-cube.
And it was an exercise to do a conservative analysis.
Which
That was
drove up the
intent.
number of trips, by the way, because of the conventional component, which I'll defer to Maurice, you can go through that in more detail, and Scott as well, so. That's the difference.
I have a question regarding the jug handle on 3rd Street for Maurice. Who has jurisdiction over that?
Well, the intersection is owned by NJDOT, and they will be reviewing the plans and the designs. But I think we're in a position to work with the applicant and make sure that we get good results. The queuing issue is a real problem for the town, and I think if the signal is redesigned properly, that queuing issue could be mitigated. Like Mr. Carroll said, in reallocating the green time and making the signal more efficient. The existing signal is very old. The detection in it is probably broken. The new signal will have the latest and the best technology, including technologies that are very good in detecting the presence of vehicles and changing the signal timing accordingly. And also, in the case of this, for example, if I'm reviewing the plans, I would add additional measures to the signal design, such as a detection for the queue itself. That would change the operation upon the detection of a queue, which is not a common element in signal design, but in this case, I think it would be definitely warranted and justified. So, to summarize what I'm saying, I think the board should focus on the solutions here, and this is one of them. The board should focus on making sure that what is being built, what is being improved, specifically the intersection of 22 and 3rd and 22 and Lock, that these intersections are done to the best possible design and technology.
So beyond the intersection, the jug handle and 3rd Street is under the jurisdiction of the township? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the street is a township roadway.
They're the permittee as far as DOT recognizes intersecting state highway, but it's under the control of DOT as far as traffic operations. And I want to mention there's another approach that, again, we'll probably evaluate to try to enhance the operation of that intersection, and that is where we call split phasing, where the 3rd Street approach will have its own green ball, and then the site access will have its separate green phase. So in other words, it basically operates as it does today, where they can run they're running by themselves. There's no conflicting movements. And as part of that, there's also a situation we could discuss with DOT. That ramp, that traffic that comes out of the ramp, we can restripe that approach, and they've done it where the inside is a dedicated left, but the other lane is a shared left through right. So then you don't have the situation of a truck trying to get over to the leftmost lane to straddle, but you have them going out as a double left turn, which you have enough width on Route 22 to receive 2 vehicles turning left simultaneously. I mean, and those are...
What's going to help, sorry to cut you off, Mr. Count, we're concerned about truck traffic. Once this intersection is redesigned, it will open up. Today, what's restricting it is the barrier and the presence of the equipment at the end of the barrier. With the redesign, these barriers will be pushed back, and that's going to facilitate the left turns from the side street to the highway. It's going to make that movement more efficient.
We're not changing, do you guys know how many trucks actually fit in the jug handle?
You mean storage? How many
storage all the way around? I haven't made that measurement, but that's a simple...
2?
No, more.
What do you think, Brian? 4?
Yeah, I would,
4. But
right.
Before we back up onto 22, 4 trucks?
Oh, at least, before you back up onto 2nd down to 22? Is that what you're, yeah, at least 4.
Is that enough?
If not,
well, what will make it, and that's what I was saying before, is we can put detection on the jug handle just to immediately sense the slowing down of trucks to trigger additional green.
Okay.
So that movement gets what's called a priority phase, so that the queuing onto 22 doesn't happen.
And Joe, maybe you can help me out. If a truck comes up the jug handle, is that truck actually able to make a tight turn enough to be right in the right lane to go straight?
I've seen it.
yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because the end of that ramp is fairly wide, that gives them the ability to sweep into the rightmost lane. I mean, and that was designed by DOT. I can't tell you when.
I've seen them back and left from there and take out the whole intersection. So.
Or the turn is not tight enough and they're standing in the middle there somewhere, that happens?
My sense from what I've seen out there is that they can turn into that rightmost lane just based on the width of that ramp coming around off of 2nd Street.
I'm skeptical, but because I see it, but I'll leave it at that.
Your prioritized phasing that you're describing, of course, once you do that, you have to analyze the effect it's going to have on Route 22 as well. You just can't...
You can't do it in a vacuum. It's got to be all inclusive,
This
correct?
analysis would be very complicated. It probably would go through a dozen iterations in terms of phasing, in terms of splits, in terms of different operations, cycle length, and so on. And then, once the DOT is happy with the best operation and the best technology, they should have done it.
Where do they actually start, Maurice? Are they starting where 22 meets the highway? Is that where they would start with their studies? Where Target is currently? You know what Target is?
Well,
I mean, that's where I would start.
the code has a very mechanical, I want to call it, mechanical system that determines where do you start and where do you end. you start distributing the traffic on the highways, and you go one intersection at a time, and you go through a calculation. I'll simplify it to you and tell you if it's impacted by more than 100 trips, it needs to be studied. And you keep doing it until one intersection falls off the radar. So when they did this for this, and I reviewed that part of the study, only 2 intersections were identified as in need of study and potential improvement, and these are 3rd Street and Locke. Once you go beyond that, the additional traffic falls under that threshold that the DOT requires to include these intersections into the study. So the study right now is just Locke and 3rd, and if they were closely spaced, there would be a progression analysis. In this case, I don't think that the DOT would ask for one because they're very far apart and they don't make one cohesive network.
My point is, as you go down the road, they're not that far apart, especially if you see semi-trailers come to a complete stop and then have to come up to speed again from a red light. And I've said from the beginning, I understand there's constraints here. Nobody's looking for the applicant to come in and widen 22 and do crazy things.
Why not?
Are you recommending that?
Yeah.
But how do I answer somebody when they say, what's the impact of this thing? I'm going to say none, based on what happened when your great-grandfather lived here. I don't know what's going to happen now, and I don't mean to be facetious.
No,
you have an existing condition, you're putting something on top of that.
Yes.
And I think the public here is owed an answer. And so what is the problem with extending more than studying more than 2 intersections?
Let me answer your question first, Mr. Fry. What is the impact? I think the best way to answer that is to say there is an impact. But the developer is mitigating that impact by improving the intersection of 22 and 3rd. And that's an expensive improvement, by the way. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not cheap.
I know in the day he showed up, he talked about an overpass over 22 that never happened. So,
and they're also signalizing and improving the intersection at Locke to allow for more trucks to come in.
The two he needs.
Yeah.
And he hasn't looked at anything else.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Maurice, would it matter if you're talking about a 100-trip increase to make an intersection where you have to look at it?
Right.
Does it matter?
Qualify for this.
Right. Now, does it matter how you break up the traffic that's coming from this site? If you make a different assumption, instead of saying 70% goes here, what if it's 80%? Do they jump over the threshold? My question is, flat out, are they manipulating numbers to not have to study an intersection?
No, because if you switch the numbers, then you end up with another intersection on the other side. I mean, the volume has to go someplace.
Yeah, but right now we have 2.
But is it going to the right place, is my question. Are you happy with the breakdown of the direction that
I would
they're
say
assuming?
yes, and the reason I'm saying yes is that they did it based on a gravity model. So they looked at a 10-mile radius, and they went to census information and other information, and they reviewed the roadways and the demographics within a 10-mile radius, which is actually a very good radius for employment purposes, for, coming to work and for a facility like this. And based on that, they determined how many trips go in one direction and how many in the other direction. And also, to supplement that, they looked at the existing traffic pattern. So these are the 2 things. You look at demographics, and then you look at the existing patterns. And the DOT reviewed that study. That's called the scope of study analysis. This is done before you do the actual analysis. And the DOT approved it. And I looked at it and I found no flaws in it.
I have a question with that. I think we talked about it a year ago, too. When you're comparing it to an existing condition, I think one of the problems we had is that the existing condition wasn't properly shown. We were using charts and tables. We had no traffic counts. We're starting from an existing condition where this site is not operational. There's no trucks coming out of it. To me, that's the existing condition. How are we changing it from it is now to what it will be? I think using the charts and tables and saying, well, the existing condition was back in 1950 when this place was booming with trucks, it isn't fair.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Prime made the same.
Yes, he did.
Mr. Price, right?
And if you argue that it was booming with trucks back in the 70s, it would actually give me a weaker case, because that means they're entitled to a higher number of credits.
I'm not even conceding it was booming with trucks. They had a much better rail system back then. And in the morning, I used to come out to make a left on the 22, and they had a guard at that intersection who manually operated that light. And that was cars. That was cars coming in and out of the site. I recognize I'm not giving testimony, but I lived here, and I can't get over the fact that this is going to have a tremendous impact on 22.
I understand, and my role here tonight is to, as much as I can, make sure the board understands the DOT process. I think that's very important, because legally, that's what the applicant needs to do. And you raise a very good point, but the code was designed based on a different line of thinking. It was designed based on the simple thinking that, well, if the building is vacant, the owner can occupy it today, it doesn't have to come to us for a permit. And therefore, we're going to give him credit for what the publications tell us that facility will generate today.
But aren't they using a current
It is the current
chart? But the existing
chart.
condition is based on a different chart, a chart that would have been superseded,
No, they're
right?
using the current chart for the existing size. So they take the land use, whatever it was, manufacturing, and they would say, if it's occupied today, what would that generate? And that would be the basis.
But you couldn't occupy it today. Those buildings were functionally and structurally obsolete. Many of the manufacturing processes there, I believe, they would have trouble getting permits for it. That's why foundries moved. The whole economy's changed. It's 3 generations old.
I take somebody's word who lives here for 40 years and travels these roads on a daily basis, or over any of the studies you present. I really do.
I'm going to interrupt you a second. I'm not giving testimony.
No.
I'm explaining the reason for my skepticism.
So my focus here is, and I know we cannot do anything about it, right? I mean, our focus here is on what are we able to do, which is making the intersections the best they can be, which is, I mean, we have no influence over Route 22 and what the traffic. There's nothing we can do.
I gotta believe that there's gonna be adjustments to the signals going all the way down 22. And why can't we know that, and why can't we be prepared for that?
One thing I saw in my notes, Maurice, and I'm gonna proceed this with the same thing that Joe said. I'm not giving testimony either tonight. I have a lot of concerns, and some of the stuff I'm going back to are my notes from a year ago. And what I'm seeing is, we asked the question, why can't we figure out the existing condition and ask for traffic counts? The response was, you can when there's a site plan, not for a general development plan. So right now is the site plan. Can we ask for existing traffic counts and establish a true existing condition? That's what I was told a year ago.
But when you get the counts, right? When you get the real traffic counts, right? Then what?
Well, then you compare existing to proposed.
And then
You
what?
have it. Well, then your traffic study at least makes sense.
Okay.
You know you're gonna go from here to here, and when we look at what we have to do in terms of signalization and some of these other feasible improvements.
The chairman asked Mr. Rashad a question. Why don't we give him an opportunity to answer it?
Sure.
So we take counts today, we're taking counts of a vacant building, right?
Well, also of an existing highway structure that now has Route 78 as part of the infrastructure.
No, it's not. The study was based on actual counts of Route 78. Route 22. So Route 22 was...
You have actual counts for Route 22, okay.
Yes, there's actual counts, yeah.
Okay, so that's implemented into the...
That was implemented, and there was traffic added to it as appropriate, as the mechanism resulted in terms of additional traffic, and the studies were done according to that.
What's the peak hour count on 22? Any point on 22 near the site?
It's somewhere in the study.
Why don't we ask the person that prepared the study?
And just for the board's benefit, traffic counts were conducted in the fall of 2015, and then they were updated in the fall of 2016 to have the most current data. So that is all contained in this report, and those are traffic counts that are accepted by NJDOT.
And they are Route 22 traffic counts, right?
Route 22 traffic counts conducted in the 3rd Street area and as well as Lock Street, because I know of the influence of Route 57. So there was data collections on either side of Route 57.
Okay.
But not any further towards 78, right?
That's correct.
Excuse me, I wasn't here a year ago. I've got a question I wanted to ask. Is there still going to be a Roseberry entrance?
Yes, there is.
Accessibility where they do a turn? So if they miss the turn at 2nd Street, they can come right in there. That's just, how's that going to be addressed?
That's correct, and basically that intersection is going to be reconfigured where Roseberry will extend basically into the site, and Center Street will now be the will be the minor lake, and that'll have the stop sign control. And there's anticipated, we have to discuss this with other township officials in Phillipsburg, but in all likelihood, we're going to have 2 lanes on each approach to that T-shaped intersection. So that intersection will be improved as well as part of this development.
Your 22 count, was that just taken during peak hours?
We did a combination of 24-hour counts and peak hour counts.
All right, because I have a printout here from the New Jersey or from Delaware River Joint Bulk Bridge Commission. 2016, 34,500 daily trips on Route 22.
That's about right.
That's correct. As far as the board's benefit, during the morning peak hour, the total two-way volume of Route 22 in the vicinity of Lock Street is approximately 2,200 vehicles during the morning, and in the afternoon, it's approximately 3,100 vehicles two-way. And in the 3rd Street vicinity, the two-way volume in the morning is 2,950, and then in the afternoon, it's approximately 4,000.
To give you a rule of thumb as to how to transfer these numbers or convert them to daily numbers, you multiply by about 10 or 12, approximately. So if it's 1,000 vehicles in the peak hour, it would be maybe 10 or 12,000 per day. And he was saying between 3 to 4,000, so you multiply that by between 10 and 12 to go from peak hourly to daily.
Well, somebody here said a peak increase of 700 vehicles. Did I hear that?
I saw that at February 2016.
I don't know if that's true or not. If it is, I mean, I'm looking at, 2,200. You throw 700 on top of that, you're 30-something% increase. I don't know. That's got to have an impact.
I look at the 700 as well and figure, well, of that 700 vehicles, really 100 isn't going towards another intersection to trigger this extra study. It's really, well...
We don't count the 700. We say 700 minus the existing.
Yeah, and in a practical sense, that makes no sense.
Well, if I could offer another way that it's looked at in the DOT approach, this site, say, had a water line serving the site, and say the 16-inch water line. If they were entitled to 50% of that capacity back in 1950, 1970, 1980, in 2017, they're also entitled to that same 50% of capacity of that water line. That's the similar approach.
That's all covered by contracts, though, and it gets adjusted, and... Well, are you talking about peak capacity, or are you talking about average daily flow, or are you talking about fire protection? It's not a good analogy.
That's the general concept when the state law looks at a redevelopment of an existing site. So I just was trying to give you another approach to how they've come up with that.
So a little confused on the existing condition. The existing condition is based on the Route 22 actual traffic count and a hypothetical site count based on tables. So are you kind of mixing?
Well, it's a two-step process. The first step is to determine what the difference is on new trips versus the pre-existing trips, and determine what intersections you impact by more than 100 trips. Based on this current proposal, we'll be generating less peak hour trips during the morning and PM peak hour. So therefore, beyond the site frontage. So therefore, as far as study locations, we only consider 3rd Street and Lock Street. Then we take the 2016 traffic counts, and that's a base. We then add a growth based on DOT data they've collected to add on as background traffic growth. And then the traffic volume figures shown on Table 1, page 4, are surcharged 100% onto those 2 study locations. So again, there is no credit at the study locations.
Let me rephrase this because maybe not that they do a good job. It's complicated. You take credit when you do the study to determine what intersections need to be studied.
I understand.
But when you do the actual study, you pump all the volume. You add the 700 that you mentioned, or to be exact, I think 788, you add them to the system, and you analyze.
What doesn't make sense to me is the concept of, by building this site, we're reducing the traffic. That, I mean, I'm kind of, generalizing there, but that's kind of what I heard. By building this site, we're reducing the traffic. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. I know it's based on the numbers that you're assuming.
But it's based on, the way the law is written, it's based on the rights of the land. The land had certain development rights, and that's what is taken into consideration, that there was, this wasn't a virgin land, and we're coming to, this property had development activity, had traffic generation, and based on New Jersey land use law, it allows you to take that for credit.
Where's the adjustment for all the product that came in and left by rail?
That's the point, because that's very important. I'm sorry, Mr. Fire. In the end, we're using all the numbers. So when you look at the level of service tables that are justifying redoing the intersection, these are all the numbers. All the 2015, 2016 numbers on Route 22, the gross that is added to it for background growth, and the full trip generation of this development. That's added to that, it's analyzed, and in the end, the product you're going to get, the new intersection, is going to be analyzed and modeled based on these numbers.
For one intersection?
Yeah, for 2.
For third?
Yeah. Third and...
The new one?
Yeah.
I'm looking at all ones before and after.
That's right. That's how it is.
Yeah, I'm still...
I understand.
I know what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but from making sense, Joe has said earlier, does it make sense? Well, it doesn't make sense to run and do all your numbers and give yourself credit for something that doesn't even exist. And the credit that you're taking is making it so you don't have to analyze the next intersection. It doesn't seem...
That's true.
It doesn't seem to make sense, and it doesn't seem to be fair to the surrounding area to say, well, based on what could be there, if it was, back in the day or current day, whatever you want to call it, it just doesn't seem right.
I'll just say one, I can't say anymore. I talked to Debbie Herb several times, and from the beginning, what was her job? Community relations, right? She thinks like me.
She retired, by the way.
She retired in June, I know that. From day one, she agreed with me. This isn't testimony. She agreed that the scoping study, should go much further than one intersection or 2 intersections.
Makes sense.
And I haven't heard yet an answer to the question that if somebody from the community said, how's this going to affect traffic?
Well, let me ask the applicant's engineer, did you give any consideration or thoughts to expanding the study? I mean, you heard what the board is concerned about. What would be your response?
Well, my response to that is that there was a corridor study done for the Route 22 locations that you have mentioned, and if I recall, it's a 2009. and it was done by Maurice's firm, that identified the improvements that were being required to improve traffic conditions, and specifically, the number one intersection is 519, and there were a number of schemes developed, and that should have been a springboard to advance that further and implement those improvements. That would be through federal funds, state funds, and from my understanding, nothing's ever happened with that program since '09. I mean, and typically what happens is usually it's recommendations or requests made by the local congressmen, state senators, and/or freeholders that get you moved up on the priority list. But I haven't been involved in that. I don't know what's taken place, whether there has been further requests or...
I think I read that study, and it's a while back, and I don't think the study,
Eric, I sit in on that meeting with Debbie Hurst in New Jersey DOT and stuff, and we were talking from Route 78 all the way to Roseberry Street. Their earliest projections of even doing anything was 2020. I've been involved with the Department of Transportation with the 519 interchange for 25 years, and nothing has been done.
I mean, I'm amazed.
Progress moves slow.
Well, I'm amazed how you guys are very confident. I mean, you stand there and you say that's how it's going to be. If you guys are wrong, right, you're not the best liked people in Lopat, Alpha, and Poet anymore. You know that, right? I mean...
Hey, we can only work with the information we have available. I've been doing this 35 years, and as Maurice says, there are a number of times we go back and do research counts of things that we have projected, and...
If you take your study aside, right, like just common sense, does it make sense to you, common sense? Like, without the study, you believe in that? You really...
Oh, yes, I stand by the report. Will there be impacts along Route 22? Yes, but again, this report and application of DOT was done in accordance with the access code, which is the administrative code that's part of the New Jersey land use law. And that's the rights that go with this development.
Now, we have not heard back from DOT, obviously, on that request that happened, but we just talked about the 2009 corridor study. You know that the board has been interested in seeing a few more intersections studied for a while now. You have counts that are 8 years old. You can do a little projection on that, and you can tell us how these intersections get affected. The intersections along the corridor that we're talking about, 78 to Roseberry, we have counts that are only about 8 years old. I
got a question. When I looked at the traffic count data, and I looked at count data from 04, 09, 2012, 2014, it's interesting that from 04 to today, the traffic volumes are significantly lower. The 09 traffic counts that were in the major report are lower than DOT data in 2012, 2014, our data 2015. So there is data out there, but again, those are responsibilities of the county, the state, to address infrastructure issues. It's in this case, because there was a pre-existing use, it's not the responsibility of the development.
I have one question for Maurice. In the amended and restated redevelopment plan that was adopted, there is section 3.9 entitled Traffic Study. And it says, the redeveloper shall provide a detailed report of the existing and proposed traffic conditions prepared by one or more qualified professionals. The report should be provided to the planning board for review during processing of a site plan application. The study shall include the estimated average number of automobiles and the number and size or type of trucks or buses that will enter and leave the site each day and during peak hours, including an analysis of the ability of the existing road system to accept the additional traffic volumes. In your professional opinion, has that traffic study been provided to this board?
Yeah, the way the statement is written, I would say that yes, the applicant did comply. if the roadway system portion of that statement was defined differently, I may give you a different answer, but as it's written, the answer is yes, we comply.
Thank you. Can we take a 5 minutes, please?
Yes. 5-minute recess, please. We'll resume in 5.
I mean, you've already said that they comply with regulation. It's a private road to a state road.
Everybody take their seats, please, so we can resume.
I mean, comment, I think that's there, but I think we have something to say about Third Street, so.
We can intervene to close that.
Well, that's where she lives.
Take your seats, please.
Please explain the area. Joe, you gotta move over a little. I know I'm skinny and all, but... Excuse me, guys.
Beth, are we on?
Yeah.
Okay, they're continuing the conversation. I think we left off with Maurice saying that it wasn't required by law to study more. And that brought up a question in my head. Just because it's not required by law to do it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. So we're talking about the size of this project is so huge, and what we're asking for is a little bit of knowledge. Just because you don't have to do it according to the law. Have we asked the applicant if they're willing to do it yet officially?
That's a fair question. I think we should ask the applicant.
Has the board asked you to do that?
Yeah, we had this discussion during the GDP application, and respectfully, Chairman and board members, the answer is we're not interested in doing that for a number of reasons. One is we have fully complied with all the DOT regulations and studies, as our expert and Mr. Rashad has discussed, that before you even start your traffic study, you submit a scoping study which shows what is the extent of the area to be studied. DOT reviewed that and approved that. We complied fully with that. Although it is, in your words, Mr. Chairman, and I don't disagree with you, it is information, but information comes at a cost and a time delay. It's a substantial project, correct. My client's going to make money. He's not in this for charity work. But there's substantial improvements that are going to be imparted to both towns and the area in general. The connector road itself, which has been something that's been in the work for both towns for a number of years. At one point, there was actually a agreement between the two towns to bond to build the road themselves to help this development and help the traffic in the area. I believe, and if I misstate the number, let me know, I believe the Lock Street redevelopment and interchange improvements and the connector road itself were in the neighborhood of $5 million north, and that is an improvement. Again, yes, it benefits our project. To a degree, it's driven by our project, but that also is going to benefit the community. We will have, as board members indicated, we are going to have a connection from Roseberry up to 22 with the sidewalk. We're going to have better sidewalks and intersection at the 3rd Street Bridge. These are all things that are coming out of what is presently before the board, and we have no objection. We understand that we absolutely have to do those things and provide them. So we have come to the table with a lot, and I don't want it to seem that we're just saying, no, and the answer is no, and that's it. And that's why I want to provide a bit of an explanation. It's part of the bigger whole. We understand the practical considerations, as Mr. Pryor has raised and other board members, is, there's practical impacts here. There may be impacts larger than our site. We've complied with the law on that. There is, and I know the answer may be unsatisfactory, and it's not an easy road to go, the prior corridor study that was mentioned, and it's kind of sat. With all due respect, I would suggest, as Mr. Kennel indicated, is maybe it's time to pull that out and start making phone calls to higher up elected officials to see if that can get pushed along, that can get prioritized, and the issues in there can be addressed, because again, it benefits the entire community, not just this project. The developer is willing to do his fair share, as I indicated, to, help ameliorate the impacts of his project and as well provide some community benefits. There's other community events we haven't gotten into. I'm just dealing with traffic. So I'm saying consider it in the whole. I don't want it to be a no and walk away from the podium. So understand it, and then those are the reasons why we're declining to do a further study.
You're not taking the stance where you're afraid of being required to do Route 22 improvements. That's not, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think we talked about it in the general development plan where we realized that Route 22 isn't going to be improved, or, your hands are kind of tied. There's a lot of property limitations and whatnot, but
there's a lot of
the knowledge of how it affects the existing condition, not worrying about what you can do to fix it, just the knowledge of what it's going to do to that corridor. Just so I was 100% clear on what I was asking for.
I understand, and again, we also had this discussion quite some length during the general development plan hearings and determinations, is that the impact of this development and what's proposed here in accordance with the redevelopment plan is something that was considered by both this board, not necessarily the people sitting in the seats today, but the board as a body, as well as the township as a body in both towns was considered, and the impact of that in community-wide sense, as well as your individual towns, as well as the area surrounding, is part of that review process. And by agreeing and setting forth a redevelopment plan that says these are the uses that are allowed, the impacts of the uses are understood and they're accepted. We've discussed that last time, and I'll defer to your attorney on those issues if he wants to chime in, the board wants to hear from him. So with all that in mind, we have done all that. We've gone, I would say, a little farther. We haven't been heroes, but we've gone a little farther than that. We also have redevelopment agreements with both towns indicating how it's to be developed and other issues affecting each individual town and the communities at large. So it's all part of the larger picture, and as I indicated, we're doing what's legally required. We're doing a little more. We're not going the extra yard necessarily, but we're doing more. We're understanding, again, the issue, as an example, the sidewalks. We heard your comments. We went back and looked at it, and we incorporated, because at the end of the day, it was a good suggestion. So we're not adverse to working with both boards, both towns, the communities at large. But at some point, we have to say, okay, we've done really enough here. So again, I don't mean it to be just a flat-out no, and don't ask me a question. I just wanted to put it in context for you.
I have a question for you. Has your client entered into a redevelopers agreement with the municipality?
Yes, I think it was in 2015 with Lopatcong, as well as a similar agreement with Phillipsburg. Those have been entered into. I have a copy with me. I can give you the exact date.
What are the loose ends concerning that?
The agreement, let me get you the answer to the agreement. The agreement was signed and effective December 15th of 2015. The open issues is kind of a broad term. I don't need to be critical, Mr. Spicaro. A lot of these are triggered on when certain degrees of development happen that we need to do certain things. There is issues regarding the recreation areas, as we kind of highlighted last time. So those need to get worked through. They're more or less compliance issues. They're more or less compliance issues with the plan versus, okay, we kind of left this open, we need to discuss it and figure out how we're going to handle it. They're addressed. It's just when you hit triggers and milestones that things need to be done. The only open issue, so to speak, is a payment in lieu of taxes, a pilot agreement, which needs to be negotiated and entered into with the town of Lopatcong. We have already entered into the pilot agreement with Phillipsburg, and again, we have a standing, I think they were signed more or less around the same time, a redevelopment agreement with the township of Phillipsburg, town of Phillipsburg, rather.
Does that redevelopers agreement impose any responsibility upon the redeveloper for off-site improvements?
I apologize. I wasn't involved with negotiating. I've been doing more of the land use issues. I know it's a rather broad-ranging document. It covers a lot of issues. a lot of which are not planning board issues. So I apologize, I don't have the exact answer to that question, but it does address community issues in general. I don't know how detailed it gets into what we would talk about in municipal land use law as off-site improvements, off-track improvements, but it is a wide-ranging document.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Were the review letters that we did on the traffic report, were there some comments that needed to be addressed, Paul?
If you look at my review letter from August 18th, I'm going to just pull that out. It's section 7 of the report. I noted that the applicant had submitted the 2 traffic reports that were submitted as part of the general development plan proceedings from 2016. And I had suggested to the board that they question the applicant on whether there were any more recent reports that assess traffic conditions. And I had indicated that traffic reports were to be furnished to the Lopatcong Planning Board at the time the site plan application was filed per the General Development Plan resolution of approval. And what happened within hours before last week's hearing, we found the February 2017 report, and we had questioned why it wasn't submitted with the submission package. And subsequent to last week's meeting, Mr. Ken did officially submit it, and Mr. Ken has been here tonight testifying on it. We did have Mr. Rashad from my office look at that report. He's been here to answer questions of you tonight, or by you, I should say, tonight.
So you reviewed it?
Yes.
Were there any differences in the current report from the one from the General Development Plan?
There were some differences. The overall numbers have changed slightly, but there were no substantive differences.
So nothing of significance that would have addressed a comment that we may have had back in 2016?
The only comment of significance that I think we still need to address is the building issue of third. The board is inclined to approve this application with the condition that the applicant informs the town of how they're addressing the traffic issue. That the town should agree to the solution. It's either in signal or number improvements. I think that's a fair request.
Is there any further on the traffic report?
No, nothing further, just to follow up on Mr. Rashad's comment, is the DOT review letter we submitted dated last week. There will be a resubmission. I think some of the comments in there I was asking for a little more detail on the 3rd Street jug handle, and as indicated, when we submit and or receive anything from DOT, we submit it to Ms. Dilton with her hat on as Township Clerk, and we send a copy directly to Mr. Sturbins. So it will be distributed in that fashion, and if Mr. Rashad wants a copy directly to him, we can certainly accommodate that. So we will keep the board in both towns in the loop on those comings and goings with DOT, and as indicated, that 3rd Street jug handle is part of further analysis requested by DOT. So any changes, we will submit to professionals to make sure it's compliant, and we don't go beyond our approvals.
There were a couple suggestions made tonight to try to deal with the queuing issue. One was made by Mr. Rashad, one by Mr. Kennel. Mr. Rashad, I believe, indicated that perhaps it would be advisable to incorporate some queue detection into the design of the signal. And then I think Mr. Kennel talked about doing some striping on the jug handle, more than what's shown on the current plan, to try to better delineate the travel lanes and allow for a double left. So are you ready to commit to doing those type of improvements as part of any resolution approval, subject obviously to DOT approval of those measures?
I hesitate to commit to them because we're still in the process with DOT to talk with them about handling the Third Street jug handle and how that will eventually wind up. We will consider those issues. And I think there's some more issues at play aside from just the ones you illustrated, such as Mr. Rashad indicated, when that intersection at 3rd and 22 is redesigned, the Jersey barriers will be pulled back some to help with flow of traffic, help with queuing issues. So I think there's a number of issues floating around as to how to best address that. As both experts have indicated, DOT has the final say on how that jug handle is designed and operates. So we will commit to working with DOT on any and all suggestions they have to come to a final design that's acceptable to DOT. And of course, as indicated, we will continue to keep you and the town advised as to those projects.
Question: is the applicant willing to formally present those improvements or measures to the DOT as part of the 3rd Street discussions in order to address the August 10th letter, so it just doesn't die after tonight's discussion?
Yes. So we will commit to addressing specifically, as you asked, the striping, the restriping, and the queuing sensor system that Mr. Rashad indicated, as well as anything else. But we will present those two for discussion purposes with DOT.
If they're presented and they die, they die. At least we tried.
Correct. We will agree to do that. And again, anything else that may come up, we will certainly put forward.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Sturgis, for clarifying.
I have one question for Mr. Kennel. Based upon the studies that you've done, in your professional opinion, is there any need to perform any off-site improvements as a result of the traffic to be generated from this project?
Not based on the criteria set forth in the New Jersey Access Code.
I'm referring specifically to intersections other than those controlled by the DOT.
There have not been any additional studies of other Lopatcong streets, whether local streets. It's expected that a significant portion of trips generated by the site will be oriented to state and county roadways. The level of traffic on local streets as a result of whether it's local deliveries or employees, in my opinion, would be as such that wouldn't have a negative impact on local streets.
I have a question related to that. And I'll ask Maurice, on 3rd Street, how much of that is under DOT jurisdiction? Do we face a situation where the jug handle and so on goes so far, but it's still going to impact the parts of the 3rd Street under local jurisdiction?
Well, the DOT's primary concern would be safety issues such as spillback from the jug handle to 22. But I think we're definitely within our rights to comment back to DOT. Normally we have 30 days to do so. But if we do, we need to be very specific and provide comments within the code that they can understand and they can take action on. And what I would suggest we do is, once we receive the next submission, we take a close look at what they're proposing and make sure that it's going to, first of all, resolve the existing issue, but secondly, not affect something else at the intersection that would be detrimental to the town. And if that's the case, we need to put it in writing to the DOT, but put it, again, like I said, put it in a fashion that is scientific, that they understand, and that they can act upon.
I think it might be prudent for this board to authorize Mr. Rashad to take a closer look at 3rd Street, jug handle, pinch point, if you will, and to fashion a letter to the DOT expressing what concerns we may have.
As part of the approval process or as a condition of whatever action we choose to take?
I think as a condition.
No, me personally, I feel actually, without knowing, we don't know what's gonna happen exactly at the intersection of that street, right? You don't know what improvements will be made, is suggested by the DOT, right? That's what I read, right? So I'm asked today to vote on something which we really don't know what the outcome is gonna be, right?
But what we know is that the traffic signal would be completely redone. It would be made ADA compatible. There would be better crossing facilities. There will be better ADA compatibility at the corners. There will be some physical improvements, like I said, and I'm pretty confident that the DOT will require pulling back the median. Also, the design will require that, because today the DOT requires that the designer run large truck templates through the intersection to make sure that the intersection is wide enough for that. So we know that. We also know that at Lock there will be a signal, there will be 2 left turning lanes in the median. The traffic study actually has an intersection design for Lock that shows the geometry and the layout. So I think at least I know a lot in terms of what's being done. Now, do we know whether or not the operation would be split or overlap or what kind of detection? I don't think we do at this point, nobody does. But I can assure you, by the way, you guys know I worked with you for 15 years, so I know exactly how it works in there. They'll be very demanding when it comes to traffic signal design, and that process is very, very onerous, and they'll make sure that you will have the best design, the best equipment, and the best technology once it's done.
I go back to my last question. DOT goes and they review the design and they come up with a solution. Is there any part of the project which goes beyond that and would be exclusively under our jurisdiction, local jurisdiction?
I mean, 3rd Street, if, for example, the
3rd Street. Let's say they had to widen something or redo some of the jug handle or something.
I don't think physically that will be the case, but operationally that may be the case, and hopefully it will not. With the intent.
Operationally, it's they're responsible for timing of the signal and all that, right? So, I mean, we're back to DOT's jurisdiction here.
Correct.
Well, my suggestion then is building on what Tony said, but I mean, I would, in conjunction with whatever we decide to do, I'd like to have Maurice work with us and get our opinions before DOT in a timely and professional way. I don't think, based on our discussions at the GD, back at the General Development thing, I approve that based on the understanding that at Lock Street it was a private road going on to a road under the exclusive jurisdiction of DOT, and that was probably beyond our jurisdiction. And it appears that this one is probably falling in the same slot, following the same direction. DOT is going to work it out, and whatever they decide is going to be implemented.
I understand your question, I'm sorry.
We really have no jurisdiction. We have no more jurisdiction on 3rd Street than we do on Lock Street.
Within the limits of their jurisdiction, which is the jug handle, yes.
Yeah, and I'm asking it, would there be any jurisdiction beyond that for us?
Not as currently shown on the plan. All the improvements that are shown on the plans right now
Or under DOT jurisdiction?
Under DOT jurisdiction.
Yeah. So, I mean, following our logic that we applied at the general development plan, that question is beyond our jurisdiction.
It may impact, what DOT decides may impact 3rd Street, but it's splitting hairs to say that we have jurisdiction over 3rd Street exclusive of the intersection and jug handle. You can't consider it in a vacuum, because any impact upon 3rd Street will be a direct function of what the DOT decides in terms of the improvements to that intersection. I think it leads us back to the same place.
Well, if DOT reviews this and approves it, and it has an impact, I mean, where do we stand other than to appeal to DOT at that point?
I think we're very limited in what we can do.
Yeah.
The appeal would need to be done prior to the approval.
Well, yeah. Sometimes you have to tweak these things, though, I know. Timing and so on, that it's not perfect the first time around.
Based upon my recommendation, and Joe, your follow-up, I'm certain that the municipality will get more than its 2 cents in the DOT as it relates to that intersection and the jug handle and 3rd Street. Mr. Rashad is known down there, he's respected, he's got experience, he can speak the language, I think he can be an effective advocate on our behalf.
I don't disagree.
If I may just address one thing, Mr. Sparrow, I don't mean to parse words. You had indicated that would be a condition of approval, and I would ask that it be a direction by the board to Mr. Rashad, because no doubt Mr. Rashad will do the job and do it competently and quickly, but we would be in the place of making sure he submits that comment letter to DOT, and if he doesn't, then we violated our condition of approval, and we can't direct Mr.
Rashad. The onus is on us. We understand that.
So, you certainly can put in the resolution, the board directed Mr. Rashad to do whatever, but as a condition of approval, you understand the position we would be in.
You will have no affirmative obligation in that regard.
We certainly cooperate, but we can't force Mr. Rashad to do it. Thank you. And again, I have no doubt that he won't do it and do it confidently.
I do want to add, I do reserve council's right to continue its dialogue with community relations at DOT and make its position known. Whatever impact it has, but we're going to continue to lobby for a practical approach to the other intersections.
I said he has another question.
I just have one issue, and this was really outstanding from last week's meeting. Mr. McGrath was not able to answer to it. There's a waiver required for the center line radius of the connector road. There's a 185-foot center line radius proposed, where the ordinance requires 500 feet. And what was indicated, there was going to be testimony on that and possibly an exhibit presented to show that trucks will be able to navigate through that roadway, in that section of the roadway with that radius. We will not have encroachment on the other lanes. So I think that's something that we need to resolve as well. And Lori, since you were also Mr. Brown's on that.
This is A4.
In response to the question, we did formulate an exhibit for tonight. We used was the, I think it's called truck turning maneuver. I don't know the exact terminology for the program, but what we did was we drove the semi through in both directions through the site to show that as they drive through the site, if they pass each other, there's no conflict between either lane. The trucks don't cross what would be considered the center line of the roadway. And the 185-foot radius that we are talking about is in this area right here. I'm pointing to A4, dated, what a date of August 28th. And the area that I'm speaking with would be approximately 200, maybe 300 feet from the Route 22 intersection. The 180-foot or 85-foot radius is the center line between the egress and the exit of the project. So as the trucks pass each other, the pavement widens out substantially in that area, and there's, as you can see by the exhibit, the heavy lines that are here, the trucks are, substantially far away from each other.
What is that document entitled?
It says on it, truck circulation. It's a sheet 1 of 1. Its scale is 1 inch to 80, and it's dated August 8th, 2017. I left it with a draft on my signature because it had not been presented as a
August 8th or 28th?
I'm sorry, 28th.
Mr. McGrath, I can understand this. Before this request, that was a gentler curve there? Is that what we were talking about, and you've made it sharper? Or
No. What we did was we were asked to present that the trucks did not have an influence on each other as they passed each other because of the height.
Okay, so it's a question concerning your design.
Correct.
And you're testifying that
there's no
interference. Did you use templates on that, or how did you actually drive the truck?
Well, the intersection, how we use a template, but then...
And then you verified it with trucks driving at an acceptable speed? Yeah.
It's difficult for me to see it from here, but I understand what was done, and I think that exhibit needs to be submitted, and will be part of the review process.
Right in here is where the truckers have to make the call.
Yeah, it was requested at the last meeting.
I mean, it looks fine from here, if I can differentiate the point, the lines. It looks like the trucks do have a good path to negotiate the roadway. We'll need to take a closer look at it. What size trucks do you use on your plan?
It's WB50 truck. It might be bigger.
Okay, I think you need to use something a little bigger than that. Meaning it's a large facility, maybe WB7.
No, I'm sorry, it's too small. I can't see what they actually did.
That's a technical matter. We can fix it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other
give you a
curve
sense
is
of
all right
how
to
long-
embrace. The other curve, check that one out as well.
Yes.
If it turns out to be problematic, what is the fix?
You widen the road. Or you realign it.
And there's room for that?
As you can see, there's plenty of space between the vehicles at this point that it can accommodate if there's a change required.
Is there?
You recognize that would be a condition?
Of course.
Okay.
If there aren't any other comments by board members from regarding the traffic analysis and plans, we'll take public questions and comments on what we just heard testimony on with the traffic. Yes.
Maria Heaven, 700 Lock Street. I'd just like to know, what is the game plan for traffic coming out of the facility and onto Lock Street? Because there's really nowhere for anybody to turn around. The only place to really get back onto 22 if they've made a wrong turn is through my farm road, which is dangerous. And aside from that, you could have a tractor trailer potentially going down that little windy road, which has low wires, little bridges and stuff like that, and they'd really be stuck. So I just want to know what's the forecast for that, because I haven't heard anything regarding that direction.
Yes, that is. Can you answer that question?
Yeah, the intent was that Lock Street would not be for trucks, and we would sort of agree to any signage that there are no trucks to be going on the Lock Street. It's certainly not designed that way. It's a municipal road, it's a residential road, and it was always intended to remain that way. So whatever signage, weight restriction that the town wants on, they can do that by ordinance, and we would agree to that as well, to ensure that there's no truck traffic. It was never intended to be that way.
Okay, but what about other traffic, cars and things like that make that wrong turn? And It will increase traffic with them having to really basically go all the way back through town with no other way to turn around.
The cars would turn around, they normally could continue through the connector road and out to 3rd Street and then move back around. It was not meant to be, really for anything but the local traffic that has always been on Lock Street.
Considering that we talk about up to 1,000 people working at the facility, making sure that Lock Street does not become an alternate road for employees to go to the job site, I think that's a prudent thing to do, right?
I don't even really mean that. I mean like people making a wrong turn out of, like where I had discussed last week where they're coming from Route 22, heading west from east, and they make the turn into the development, and they're really looking to head back on 22. They're really looking to head back east towards the mall. So there's no real accommodation for them to make a U-turn in there, or is there? Because what they would basically be doing is coming into the facility road, the connector road, I should say, and they would be making either going into the development through the connector road all the way through, or they would be making a turn onto Lock Street. Is that correct?
So your question is what's in place to handle the vehicles that want to do a U-turn?
Right. And also, you did answer about the truck traffic, if there were signs there that said, no trucks this way or whatever. But I can imagine that people would make a wrong turn, and then what do? There's no real accommodation for them to do anything but cut through the farm, which is dangerous, again. All right?
How far is the Science Center from your property?
Across the street.
Proposed?
Across the street.
You're right on the corner.
I'm on the bend.
Well, no, my question is, you could post U-turn signs before the parking lot or something.
Well, what I would suggest is, right now, I think that pattern exists for people and future residents of the new apartment complex, if they're coming from the mall and they need to get back to the new residence. Is right now,
down there.
Correct. Right now, what they do is they continue to the 57 interchange to the route to the 3rd Street traffic signal to make the U-turn. What we would do is the design at Lock Street cannot accommodate U-turns because it's a double left turn. So we could add signage to direct U-turn traffic half a mile, 3/4 of a mile to continue to make that U-turn, so that they're not inadvertently trying to make a U-turn or a wrong turn onto Lock Street.
And that's something that will be done when the signal design is being completed. That's something fundamental that the DOT will look at.
That's the next layer. We haven't got that. That's the next layer of redo.
Will be happening.
Right.
Right, and you'd have no U-turn signs. But what's to prevent somebody from, is your question, what's to prevent somebody from using Lock Street?
my drive, which is dangerous, that connects Lock Street to Route 22, just past the Ford family, and if you're on Lock Street, it's before the barns. There's a road that connects Lock Street to Route 22. It's in a dead man's curve in both directions. So if you're coming down Lock Street and you're trying to make a left into that driveway, you can't see what's coming to the right. And when you get onto Route 22, you can't see what's coming down Route 22. It's dangerous twice. Really dangerous twice. In a really bad spot. So that's my concern.
So they're using your private driveway to access Route 22.
People do it all the time. I can't be there to police it. I can't park a bus in my driveway. And there again, my property being highway business use, at some time maybe it will be developed into something, but right now it's not. It's dangerous, and I don't know if the Route 22, the DOT or whoever's in charge of Route 22 there, plans on ever widening it to make it more accessible, to see better. I don't know if that's in the game plan. That's another story, because that doesn't, involve what they're trying to do right now. But it is my concern, because it's a natural way to want to go. People use it all the time, and now you're talking about how many more people are going to be in there. Knowing that's a little shortcut, I won't have to sit in traffic behind all those trucks. I'm going to just jump in, I'm going to cut through this farm, use their little access road and hop up. And you just don't want to be having fatalities where people can't see what they're doing. I'm amazed that there aren't more accidents there as it is in the curve of the road there, where people can't see what's coming, because they're on the other, opposite side of the road. They drive like crazy, really fast, coming through there, they cut the corner. So it amazes me that there hasn't been more activity and accidents there.
Is that inside the limits of the project, or would that be something, like,
The
would that be
project is
signed?
causing that problem, so just,
No, I'm just like,
Yeah.
I guess my question is the only thing that comes to mind is signage. You know, that you could say, no access to Route 22 or no through traffic, but...
Hey, you know what?
yeah, it says
You
that.
have a 25 miles per hour sign in front of your house.
I have a sign up
Me?
there, it
Yeah.
says,
No, I don't.
later on your
I
escalator.
wish I did.
Not through the street and all that stuff that's used all the time by school buses and everything.
That's a two-way
Mr.
street.
Rashad, is that something the DOT
My-
needs to
my name?
address?
Yeah.
Or is it beyond the scope
It
of
can,
what they would
yeah,
do?
it can, yeah. Anyway, just to mention.
I'm not exactly sure. I need to look into it, maybe see it in the field to understand exactly what
I think quite honestly, you get all these improvements built and we see how it functions in reality. And quite honestly, there is going to be a site plan application at that intersection, Connected Road and Lock Street, which is going to extend eastward to this 90-degree bend in Lock Street for the recreation center. So I think that application could give the board the ability to analyze this particular issue in a little more detail, particularly if these improvements are in at that point. I think everything that may happen there is speculative at this point. I think we have to really see what's going to happen after it's improved.
If I may make a suggestion, the woman had been up at the last meeting, and just, I know Mr. Rashad hasn't been there, but just to illustrate, her property's on the bend in the road here, and there's a private gravel driveway that cuts through the
Maybe the other exhibit,
22.
clear, right? The one that doesn't go that
Yes,
far.
that's just generally where it is and what the issue is, and the reason I got up to speak is it sounds like it's an existing issue, and the neighbor is concerned it may get aggravated by this project. So the reason I got up was to suggest, because one of my other hats I wear, I represent municipalities, that perhaps I don't know if the town council needs to take action for signage to say, private roads. She could certainly put up a sign that says private road. It may be better if it's on the road a little bit from her property, that, private road, no through street. I don't know if, we'd have to address DOT to have it on 22, but again, it sounds like it's an existing condition. She's indicating it's been happening for years, concerned it will get worse. Again, that's a public road. It's not being changed in that area. It will be a public road. I think signage is a good first step to indicate to the public presently. It's something that you may want to consider doing sooner rather than later.
I would recommend, Mr. Kim, that you include that in your project. It's insignificant as far as cost, a couple signs. I don't think the DOT will move on something like this, or at least not fast enough.
On 22. Again, I understand that.
There are signs? What do they say?
This is private drive.
There are signs.
There are signs, okay, I didn't realize that either. There's nothing that's going to prevent people from doing anything. There's a million laws in the books, how many times we all do a few miles over the speed limit, so I think there's not much more that can be done aside from signage. It is private property, it's trespassing. I would suggest to the woman, if it happens, she should probably call the police and file a report. If it is a safety issue she's talking about, it's something that should be addressed at the municipal level. But we'll certainly...
Paul's recommendation is a good one, that we can...
Is there any way to accommodate for a U-turn here? I don't know about the DOT rules. Is there any way to incorporate or accommodate for U-turns so that people can safely make that turn at the new roundabout that's being made? I mean...
What my thought is when the nature center site plan comes in, there's going to be a parking area, and perhaps there could be two different ingresses and egresses, so if somebody went down there inadvertently, perhaps the parking lot would provide a means to recirculate and go back out to 22 instead of going down your driveway. That's just something I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I just thought maybe there might be
This turns out to be an issue.
some kind of, since this whole big, it seems to me, like not quite a roundabout, but it seems to be that there's lots of ways that you could easily reconfigure that, what you're doing at the bottom of Lock Street, just to accommodate people to go around and turn right back out onto Route 22. From what I saw of the drawings, why couldn't there just be...
So your question is, can you put a U-turn on Route 22?
Like up here, couldn't you just have it go this way also and not just direct people that way? Couldn't it somehow...
It's something...
Then you would need traffic, but you have to cross 22 again.
But couldn't you be able to make a right thing, right?
You're right.
It seems to me, I kind of looked at it up
A right is
close.
one or a left.
I'm sorry?
Northwestbound.
Instead of speculating tonight on
Okay.
what the solution may be, why don't we take Paul's advice, and we're aware of the issue, but revisit it when the site plan comes in for the nature center.
Okay, this is before that part of the road tonight?
The nature center is beyond the improvements that are being conducted as part of this site plan application on Lock Street.
I mean, I'm talking about the end of Lock Street and what's being done there.
What do you mean by the end of Lock Street?
Well, the end of Lock Street will eventually be torn up over here, I understand, so once this is in, this will be torn out. So is there some way that while we're working on this piece here, that can be improved to incorporate a way for people who are coming west from the east to turn around and get back heading east? Wouldn't this be the natural spot where you might want to consider putting that kind of a turn in, rather than make people go all the way down the road and turn around in a nature center and come all the way back out? Because to my argument, still, their natural thing that they're going to want to do is they're going to say, oh, look, there's a little cut through, let me just hang this left. Okay?
I think you just said something completely different than what we're talking about. You're talking about a 180-degree turn on Route 22, which is different than what you were talking about. You're talking about somebody inadvertently going onto Lock Street and doing a U-turn on Lock Street. What you just said is completely different.
No, all right, maybe I was confusing in the way I said it. I was talking about making some kind of,
I think Mr. Kennel already testified to that because of the double left, you can't have a U-turn on Route 22.
I'm talking about where this new area of the road is, in this roundabout sort of thing that they've got going, where it'll come back up and go back onto Lock Street. Can't there be another way for that to continue it back around so that they would end up back at the light so that they could make a right onto Route 22? Is that not doable?
I think the question is can you make this intersection accommodate a way for a person to do a U-turn who are going west to now change their mind and go east? And we have heard some testimony a little bit to that. We were talking about, well, the place to do the U-turn is the next intersection up at 3rd Street, and we talked about it a little bit, but is that your question?
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if what you're trying to okay tonight is the connector road as it sits. Would you please consider the end of Lock Street, the end down by Lock Street, to maybe accommodate people who are coming? Like, I realize that you're saying that they can't just hang a complete U-turn in the middle of Route 22. But if they're going to make the left into the complex, isn't there some way you can accommodate for them to get back on Route 22 East from that circular end that you're doing there? I mean, that just seems like the most natural place to me when I look at it, but I don't know all the rules and regulations of DOT and how the pitch of the road is over there, how it all seems.
So we can wrap this conversation in a good way. I would suggest I'll make the request to the DOT, but I would tell you, I doubt they're going to agree.
Is it a DOT issue? Because I don't really know.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Anytime you have traffic leaving the state highway or entering it and controlling that traffic is under state jurisdiction. We'll make the request. I'll look at it. If we can accommodate something, we'll do it. But I'm not very confident we can. But we'll take a look at it.
Okay. Okay. That's why I just wasn't understanding why they weren't really willing to try to make accommodations right in that hub of the new road that they're making, rather than elsewhere down the road, you know? Did that answer your question? Or was I clear on how I described it?
Yeah, understand.
Okay.
Yeah, as I say, you have basically two concerns. People who want to make a U-turn there, they're going to go down Lock Street, go through your property, and personally, I don't think that's going to be as serious as perhaps you think.
Okay.
I think maybe the other question, though, is trucks queue up there and somebody decides to hang a right, and they know this little shortcut through your property to get home, and
I'm honestly more concerned about the danger of getting onto that little cut-through road and back onto Route 22 than I am people actually using it.
and I think
So
that's
just
something that,
want to
as
look
part of
at
this
it.
project, we have to look at in some fashion at some time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Brian.
Evening, guys. Brian Weeks, 208 South 7th Street. I just want to paint a little picture of what the 80s kind of looked like to me, okay, on that highway. I can remember going to date my wife up today and standing in a line of trucks all the way up to Hesses, all right, in the slow lane, okay, that was probably 85, okay. I can remember fighting to get through the light because the truckers would fight their way even to make the right-hand turn because they could, okay, and they still can, all right. I can remember the turn junction. There's homes, there's a road that travels between there and the island. I can remember those guys being so mad they can't sleep at night, okay. I can remember trucks parked on the turn junction, okay, halfway between 2nd and 1st Street. It's wide enough that the truckers would park 2 of them there and sleep there at night, okay. I can remember coming up to where 3rd and that junction comes together, all right. I can remember the truckers not letting me coming on 3rd Street to get in, and I bet you I sat there 5 minutes, okay, because the truckers shut down the lane on the highway, didn't care about anybody coming in, okay. They weren't smart enough to realize they couldn't move because there was nowhere to move where they were going, so we sat there for like a couple times for that run around. I can remember 3rd Street being backed across Baltimore Street, okay, due to all that. Really think out what you're doing here, and I'm talking to the DOT direction here. You will have a nightmare if you do it wrong, okay, I'm telling you that. I know there won't be as many trucks coming that way because you got other, ways to come in, but don't make a nightmare because we rushed something to give somebody some money, okay. We live here, we operate here every day. I want to be able to still live here and operate here every day, okay, in a nice manner. I don't believe that the guys that live in that island there on the turn junction deserve to be treated that they don't have a stop to get out of their driveway. All right, they can't go to work in the morning at times. I remember that. They're late to go to work because that trucker doesn't care. He's not moving. All right, so that's where I'm, you know what I mean? You've got to really think, and that's the DOT side of there's roads, there's driveways, there's things there on that section that were shut down. So I don't have the answer, but I can tell you what happens, all right, in that aspect. So that maybe leads you in a little bit different direction. I don't know. I really don't care if they got an overpass. Not my problem. That's my opinion, okay? We need to be able to live. The businesses deserve to be able to get business. They deserve to get out of their house. They deserve to live here. They pay the taxes for it here, okay? That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Brian. Any other public comments? Okay, so we're back to, we're closing public. Any other comments from the board? I'm assuming we're looking to vote one way or the other tonight. Paul, do you have anything else to?
Just one issue I want to review with the board. This relates to Section 8 of my report, which deals with geotechnical issues. Let me strike that. Section 6 of my report, which deals with geotechnical issues. Now, part of that particular section of my report was addressed at the last meeting. Mr. McGrath had submitted supplemental report to address a few of the comments. I believe it was comments 6.5 and 6.04 through 6.06. But 6.01 through 6.03 were not addressed. One of the big issues is that report from 2015 was submitted that only partially studied the project area that's being presented to the board as part of this application. Had some discussions with the applicant, and the applicant would like to, I guess the applicant is willing to submit the required report per the ordinance, but they want to do so under condition of approval. So I just wanted to let the board know that. If we go that route, I think we should only give this applicant, if we do vote tonight, preliminary approval. We should not give the applicant a final approval. And for that and other reasons, and we should make sure that all these plan revisions as well as this particular report are submitted before we entertain a final site plan application. Got to go in that direction. The report does not address the whole site, and it's based on an old concept plan. It's not based on the current site plan, so it does need to be updated. Maybe Mr. McGrath can indicate to us in testimony that he's going to do that, he's going to address that.
So real quick, Paul, to kind of stop, we have three choices tonight, and we're here, again, we have deny the preliminary and final, we can approve a preliminary, we can approve a preliminary and final. What's the clear-cut difference between the three? As a planning board member, I'd like to see the changes come back. So that would be either a denial or a preliminary approval, and then you will see the changes come back.
One of the other choices is that you don't vote on it, and you have the applicant make all the changes to the plans and submit this updated geotechnical report. Anything else that needs to be updated to the board before you vote. So there's an option that's available to you. The other is to have a vote tonight only on the preliminary, or doing the preliminary and the final, and having a whole series of conditions in the resolution associated with that. I would not vote on the final, in my opinion. If you would like to vote tonight, I'm not recommending that you vote on a final. If you're limited to a preliminary, and there will be some strict conditions where this applicant would not be able to submit for final until all these revisions are made and this geotechnical report is updated and resubmitted to the board.
Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a big difference between having them, redo the application and a preliminary approval, because they have a lot of comments they have to address.
They do.
Anyway, so is there a difference between not voting and a preliminary approval?
I think there's a difference for the applicant. I think the applicant would have something to rely upon in trying to move his construction project along. I think it's a value to the developer in getting a vote tonight, just like earlier tonight you gave a subdivision approval that helps the developer move the process along. So, and I think we can structure the conditions appropriately to protect the board, to make sure that all these revisions and to the plans and reports are done, and that the applicant's not going to be at our doorstep until all this stuff is done, corrected to our satisfaction. So I think that there certainly is some advantages to the applicant at this point. But it's a policy decision of the board. It's really
if I can add just my own opinion, I've never liked preliminary and final on the same night when there's a ton of conditions on the preliminary. I like to clear them up and have a clean final. I just see no advantage to the board in lumping them together when there's so many things that are owed and haven't been reviewed yet. If the board chose to vote tonight, I agree with Paul. I tend to go with a conditional, preliminary approval with conditions, and they can, when they're all taken care of, they'll come through and very quickly get a clean final.
As part of this, I would want Mr. Kem to state for the record that he would be withdrawing his request for final approval if we go in that direction, so that it's not part of the vote at all. It's going to be taken off the table, and he would come back at a future date. He would file a separate application after all these conditions are addressed.
So yes, actually, as indicated before, we have discussed with Mr. Sturbins these issues before the meeting, and I understand that having the geotechnical information that he's requesting, this board routinely wants that in place before granting a final approval, and Mr. Sturbins certainly needs that to have confidence in making a recommendation to the board, so I don't want to put him in that position. I don't want the board to take action that they normally don't. So we would certainly agree to a preliminary approval with conditions. Again, we went through the entire review letter. All those conditions need to be met. Specifically, we will provide the geotechnical information that Mr. Sturbins is requiring. And I think because it's quite voluminous, I think we were going to submit a copy directly to Mr. Sturbins and one copy for the file. I will submit it on CD, so if anybody wants copies, they can certainly get them, or we can, if you want more, we'll submit them. But if the number of copies is acceptable, we would agree to that. And again, the condition of meeting all the other conditions of preliminary that have been discussed, compliance with the reports, Mr. Ritter's report as well. And if that's acceptable to the board, then we would withdraw the request for final and then remake that request once we have all the conditions of preliminary met.
Now, how does the fact that you haven't met with our professionals yet play into the preliminary approval tonight?
The meeting next week.
Does that play into the board's decision that you were going to meet with the applicant and discuss some of the, I think it was some of the more simple things, I think, like the landscaping?
There was agreement to address all the comments.
Okay.
Either by just doing them or meeting with George and I to discuss how to address the comments, which we're going to do next week. So I think they've been addressed, and it's just a matter of getting them into the resolution and having that part of your memorialization.
Okay. Addressing a lot of these comments, some of them are highly technical. It doesn't impair the board's ability to vote on preliminary. I think what we're hearing from Paul and other words, and I'm not speaking for him, is that professionals are of the opinion we have enough information that we're comfortable with the application. It's up to the board to decide whether it wants to vote or not.
So Paul and George, is that where you agree?
Yeah, I think our meeting coming up is more one of, as an example, the landscaping, the style, how it's going to be met, the types of plants, but it's not an issue of coming up with a completely new landscape plan. It's really how we see them, that they should try to carry it out and what plans to put in. So I think as a condition of approval, it can be addressed, and we can discuss it with the applicant in terms of what he's going to finally put on the plans.
If there is a motion for a preliminary approval, I'm wondering, Tony, I'll ask you, can one of the conditions, I would like to see one of the conditions be obviously the 3rd Street jug handle addressed, but also I'd like to see the DOT's response to the letter from the township. I'd like to see that response before final also. Is that something we can put into this?
In fairness to the applicant, I think that goes a little bit too far. We have no control over DOT's timeline, and they may have satisfied every other concern and condition that we have for preliminary, and to hold them up based upon what another governmental agency may do, I think it would just be plain wrong.
Okay. So if we give them preliminary and final down the road, and then 2 months later DOT comes back and says, we agree with the township's concerns, do the additional corridor study, where does that leave us?
Leaves the applicant without DOT approval, and without DOT approval, they can't move forward. And if for some reason the DOT changes the design that's been submitted to us, they have to come back to secure amended approval.
And some of the revisions that they need to make for us are going to be, I don't want to say dictated, but they're going to need to resolve some things with the DOT to be able to do those revisions, particularly the drainage improvements along the highway by the Connector Road intersection. So I think there's a lot of things in that DOT letter that are going to have to be done by the applicant in order to advance the plan revisions on our site plan.
Additional comments?
I have one more question for Maurice, because Brian, he just want to know, with all the talk about the roads and the traffic lights, who's actually, for a lack of a better term, looking out for the residents and the businesses around these areas?
I think part of it is the DOT process, and part of it is tonight.
I mean, you work for the DOT, is that one of your considerations?
For you.
One of the DOT's consideration is the surrounding businesses and how traffic affects businesses and residents in these construction areas.
Their concern is that the after condition doesn't degrade significantly compared to the before condition. And they have a very strict criteria in terms of how much you can degrade. It's, to put it simplistically, you could use quarter of the capacity remaining at every approach. If you exceed that, they will not approve the application. So you have to comply with that. In addition to that, they're very big with safety. As you saw in the review, if there's queuing, there's blocking something else, or if there's a pedestrian issue, that would be very hard on the priority list as far as review.
Any other comments? All right, if someone is so inclined for a motion for preliminary, you can make it based on all the recommendations and looking into the other issues that are still outstanding.
Don't everybody speak at once.
I am not hearing a motion, Tony, so does that mean that when these revisions are made, the applicant will come back and we're going to go over the changes and continue our discussion?
No, I don't think it means that. I think we've concluded the hearing. I think someone needs to make a motion. And if you're asking for a motion and none is forthcoming, then you certainly, as the chair, can make a motion.
What's the second option for a motion? To the preliminary is one option. How would you make a motion? If you don't want to vote, is there a motion for a no vote, or is there a motion for a...
I'll make the motion simply because I think it's the right thing to do at this point. I wanted to see everybody else's reaction here, but I think it's the right thing to do, and I think I'll make the motion to grant this application preliminary approval, subject to, and we didn't really read the conditions. Should we recite those, Tony, or...
They're all part of the record. Please don't press me to do that.
No, all right. You know what? I want to do this correctly. I mean, this will be memorialized by resolution next month, right? So,
Second Joe's motion.
Subject to the conditions that Tony has delineated. And that's my motion.
You got that back? I second Joe's motion based on the conditions.
So we have a first and second preliminary based on the stipulations we talked about at the meeting. So we have a roll call.
Members Korea,
Yes.
Simmons.
Yes.
Crowner.
Yes.
Wolf.
Yeah.
Mayor McKay.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Chesky.
No.
Chairman Johnson. Chairman
Yes.
Thank you, board members. Appreciate your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You've got to do your inspection before we do this. So we can talk about it next night. All right, do we need a motion to push it off?
We may have another thing going, so.
Yeah, that's okay.
On the litigation matter, I was authorized at the last meeting to file a response on behalf of the planning board. I have filed an answer to the complaint. There's nothing else to report on that now. The developer has yet to file a response to pleading. Once that's filed, I'll provide you with a copy. After all the pleadings have been filed, the court will schedule a case management conference, which probably will be in the next 45 to 75 days. I'll keep you all in the loop. If you have anything else to say.
Okay, I will move that item to next month for the opportunity to discuss, if any board.
I don't think, Tony gave an excellent summary. That's what happens. These things move at their own pace, and I think he's reported what he has to report at this point.
And none of it's confidential, so...
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'll postpone my discussion on the electronic submission. Paul gave us a sample ordinance. We don't need to talk about that tonight. Anything else?
Any other resolution to amend the GDP?
Yes.
Let's just do a motion.
Motion to approve the resolution that we received tonight on the GDP.
There's, I need to dig out, there were two changes requested by the applicant. I think instead of manufacturing these pumps, they test the pumps, and this may not be the only location, but it's one of a very few locations. But other than that, the resolution stands as it is, and I can make those technical changes. I think we should just adopt it.
This is the building that has to remain.
Yes.
It's a long-term contract with the government.
Yes. We honestly don't have a choice. So, did we get the motion?
I'll make that.
Okay, I have a motion. We got a second. Roll call.
Maria?
Yes.
Fitzsimmons?
Yes.
Pryor?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Mayor Kay?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Chesky?
Yes.
Yes. Anything else? And if nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn. We got a first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, yes. Really?